So you have a small minority. All right, well noted. All right, we'll go through the anatomy of a manuscript and how to structure a paper. And I'm going to present in the context of of a journal editor. So what does an editor look for in your paper? That's the context through which we will frame this. So this is my favorite paper in the whole wide world. This is a paper that was actually published in a scientific journal, the Journal of Applied Behavioral Analysis. The title was The Unsuccessful Self-Treatment of a Case of Writer's Block. And this is the shortest manuscript ever written because it has 0 words. There's nothing at all. This is the paper, nothing. There's no text, there are no references. And this was published without revisions. It's quite a case of humor in research, but it's apparent from the title. The author aptly titled it as The Unsuccessful Self-Treatment of Writer's Block. And I show this to illustrate the fact that writing is hard. The most challenging thing is transforming a blank sheet of paper into some wonderful, amazing text. I think that's a miracle that happens. So it's good to have a structure that will guide us on how we can go about making this transformation from an empty page to something with substance in it. So the roadmap we're going to follow today is based on 3 underlying principles. The FBR. FBR is about fast, bad, and wrong. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we have to write fast. You can't take forever writing anything. Like, life is too short, so you have to learn how to do things fast. So that's where the FBR will come into place. Then you also have to write smart, right? So again, we've established that writing is hard. So the easy way to solve that problem is to have a framework which can guide us in writing. So we'll talk about the 3-item approach today. And then write right. So it doesn't help us if you write right, or if you write fast, but it's nonsense. That doesn't help anyone. So we need to have a framework where you can write right, write fast, and write smart. So how do you avoid sins of omission and commission when you write? So let's talk about the first one, speed, writing fast. And the mantra here is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So the model we're going to talk about today is, if you've attended any of our classes before, you should be familiar with FBR. I am a big fan of FBR. I'm sure I've mentioned a million times before. FBR stands for fast, bad, and wrong. Now you're wondering, but wrong starts with W. Why is it called FBR and not FBW? Well, that's the whole point. It's wrong because the wrong is spelled wrongly. The person was writing so fast that they had a typo, and so they spelled wrong without the W, right? And that's the whole point. FBR means that just make mistakes. The first draft of anything should look horrible. If you know you've written wrong, if your first draft looks amazing, that means you are a bad writer. If your first draft looks fantastic, you're a horrible writer. It means you took way too long writing that draft, right? So FBR means just make mistakes. And the whole idea behind FBR is just capture the big idea. When I'm writing, what I just do is make dictation. I put on Microsoft Word has this feature. Let me show you that feature. This is how I implement my FBR. So I just come here and put on a dictation and just dictate my notes to the system, right? As I dictate, obviously there'll be typos, there'll be anything, that's fine, right? Because my goal at this point is just to capture the big ideas. It is not necessarily to capture whether there's a typo in that word or the next word. That I don't care about that now. I just want to capture the big idea. So I'm not even looking at the screen. I just stare into space and say everything I want to say. And the notes are taken from me, all right? So that's the whole idea behind FBR. Don't worry about whether there is a typo in the word, whichever word, it doesn't matter, right? That's the whole spirit behind FBR. Write fast and write wrong. Capture the big ideas, and later on we can worry about fine-tuning it, right? This is what ChatGPT is for. I can just copy this text and take it to ChatGPT and say, please correct grammar, typos, and everything. And it's going to do it in a second, literally. But the main ideas, ChatGPT cannot generate those ones. I have to create those ideas by myself, right? So that's the whole idea behind FBR: write fast, write bad, and write wrong. Even scripture tells us, for those who are religious, even scripture tells us there's a time for everything and a season for every activity. So there's a time to write and a time to edit. You cannot write and edit at the same time. That is just wrong. This is how you know somebody's an amateur in writing. They will write one paragraph and then they will go back. They would then change the font and say, let me see how this is going to look with Tahoma. I don't like that font. Let me expand it to size 12. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, what are we doing? Are we joking here? Or this is how you should not write, right? You cannot write and edit at the same time. You cannot birth ideas and refine them at the same time. You have to put your big thoughts on paper first, and then later on, you can then refine those ideas. Those two things cannot happen simultaneously. You cannot create content and refine the content at the same time. So there's a time for speed, and there's a time to prettify text, right? When we want to prettify the text, sure, we can at that time come here and find some fancy fonts and say, oh, let's put this in a venue and let's make it spacing of 1.15 and let's make it pretty. Sure, there's a time. That time will come, but that time is not now when we're trying to create the first draft, right? So FBR holds us to a different standard that at the beginning, just write fast, write bad, and write wrong. And don't worry about whether there are typos, where the grammar makes sense. You should take your work at the beginning and say, this is horrible. I can barely understand anything that I wrote. And so that's the whole idea. And so I use, if I'm traveling, I go to the bathroom and take napkins and write on napkins. Anything I can find, I write on it, right? And just later on, I'm going to transform that into a work of art. But later on is later on. At this point, I just have to write. So that is how to write fast. You use FBR. Now let's talk about writing smart. So before going to that model for writing, let's talk about the anatomy of a manuscript. So the manuscript is divided into these sections. The introduction asks the question, why? And by the way, we call this the IMRAD format of writing. This was based on Aristotle's approach to writing. And so it's also called the Aristotelian approach, or IMRAD, Introduction, Method, Results, and Discussion. So introduction asks the question, why? Like, why are we doing this? Methods ask the question, how? In other words, how was this done? Results answers the question, what? In other words, what did you find? And then discussion says, so what? All right, so you found this, so what? Like, why should we care? And then the conclusion says, all right, now that we know this, where are we going to? Where does the road take us to? So we need to understand these basic sections and the anatomy of a manuscript. If you don't understand what is supposed to be there, then how then can you write? So we need to understand those different sections. Now, in your journey as a writer through the different sections of a paper, you have to wear different hats. So you're going to be assuming different roles as you go through different parts of the manuscript. In the introduction, you are a salesman. That is the only thing you are. You are selling something. Think of a used car salesman. He's going to tell you all the nice things about his car. Never mind when you buy the car, it's going to be a nightmare, but that's fine. that's when you get home. For now, he's just trying to sell you this car, and he's going to tell you all the nice things about the car. So your job as a writer in the introduction is to be a salesman. You are selling your idea. You're trying to convince. Your primary audience is the buyer. The buyer here is the editor-in-chief. Of course, your secondary buyers are the audience and all the lives you want to save and the great things you want to change in this world. But first things first, your primary buyer at this point is the editor-in-chief. You have to convince me that your idea is worth buying. I mean, I don't have a lot of space in my journal to publish. I can't publish all the papers in this world, even if they're all fantastic. I can only publish a certain number of manuscripts in any given issue. So your job is to convince me that your paper deserves to be reviewed, to be considered for a slot in the next issue. So that's your job here. So you have to sell your paper. Writing is about showmanship. It's not about just addressing something important. You have to sell me the idea that it's important, and I have to buy it. So that's your job here. We'll move to the methods. Now you are no longer a salesman. Your sales days of salesmanship are over. You left those days in introduction. As you know, as a writer in the method section, you're a scientist. Now you have to be precise and think of Isaac Newton or any great scientist. Think of how they would carefully and precisely do things in the laboratory, right? That's what you want to do here in the methods. You are a scientist. In the result, you are a robot, right? Elon Musk just released his robots, and so you see how very mechanical they are. The method section, yeah. Think of a robot, think of something that is very extremely boring and dry, right? There's no emotions involved, no sentimentality, there's no feelings. That's how we want you to be in the result. We want it to be robots. Report your results without any emotions, any sentiments. It should be objective, straight to the point. No, we're going to talk more about those, but this is just a high level overview of what you should be in the different sections. Now, here in the discussion, you can be a philosopher. You are a philosopher. You should explore the meaning of life. Well, maybe not the meaning of life, the meaning of your results, right? Tell us what they mean and how they apply in our context or other contexts as well. And then in the conclusion, you are a sage. You are an elder statesman. Think of in communities, we have the elder statesmen, and the elder statesmen are the ones that tell us where to go as a society, right? Like, okay, here is where we should. If you're the chair of a department, you are the one who sets the direction, the vision. So the conclusion tells us where, okay, since we know all these things, okay, so where do we go from here? And so that is what these are the different roles you have to play. We have a problem when you now switch roles from, if you now put the role of you become a salesman in the methods, we have a problem with that. You are assuming the wrong role in the wrong section, right? So you have to keep the roles appropriate, right? And be who you are supposed to be at the different sections of a manuscript. All right, let's see how this applies. So as we're going through each of the sections, we're going to use a framework, which I call a 3 items approach. So this is an approach that I developed to just help young writers to just make it easier, right? So the 3 items approach simply means every part of a manuscript will be done in threes, in units of threes. So we're going to do in each step of the way, there will be 3 things involved. So for the introduction, we're going to have 3 paragraphs. For the methods, we're going to have 3 subheadings. The discussion, we're going to have 3 paragraphs. The conclusion, we're going to have 3 sentences. We're going to have 3 tables, and we're going to have 30 references, or 3 sets of 10s. That's what the 3 items approach means. So everything will be in units of threes. Now, is this a rule? No, of course not. This is just a structure to help you, just if you're new to writing, to think of how to structure a paper. So if you knew that, well, you have to do 3 things here, and you knew what those 3 things are, then it's easier to then write. So it's just an easier structure, framework to guide you with writing. Especially if you're new, then you know that, okay, every part of the paper, I have to do 3 things, all right? And that cut across the whole paper. Then it becomes easier for you to then develop your idea. So let's see how to apply these rules with the 3 items approach and see how that goes. So introduction. So remember, your job here, you are the salesman. You are selling, your job is to sell, right? And you remember that your primary audience, your buyer is, I am your buyer. I as the editor-in-chief, I am the buyer, and you, the author, you are the salesman. Your job is to convince me that your paper I should buy your paper, right? I should buy your ideas and publish it in my journal. Of course, the secondary buyers are the audience and all of that, but primarily right now, I am your main buyer. So why should I buy it? You're selling an idea, why should I buy it? So let's look at the 3 paragraphs of introduction and how you can structure them. Paragraph number 1, why is this topic important? That is the only thing you want to cover in paragraph 1. And you must quantify. You can't tell me something is important and then you just tell me based on just some narrative, a story. No, you have to give me numbers. Remember, you're selling. When you're selling things, you have to bring the hard cold numbers. So quantify in terms of disease, death, economic costs, vulnerable subgroups. Quantify. Put a number beside it. Let's know how important this issue is. You should limit it to about 100 words. Paragraph 2, what do we know about this issue from the literature? So your job here is to summarize the relevant recent literature. Please, this is not a systematic review. We're saying just summarize a few studies. This is not where you want to go and say, so and so et al. Said this, and so said this. And it's like, no. Please keep it to 100 words. It should be short and it should be sweet. And then the third paragraph, what don't we know and why is it important that we do? So here you've told us that it's important, so and so reasons. Smoking is a leading cause of death. It is important because smoking kills, 500,000 Americans every year. Smoking costs us billions of dollars in terms of, direct medical expenditures and lost productivity from people being hospitalized or people missing schools. Smoking causes that, environmental pollution. We have a lot of fish that die. All of these reasons are establishing why it's important, right? Now, on this topic that I'm looking at, maybe I'm looking at smoking cessation counseling. So what have other studies looked at this issue? This person said this, addressed the issue of smoking cessation in the context of ABC, right? And these are other studies that have addressed this issue. That's paragraph 2. Paragraph 3, I'm saying now that while some work has been done on this, there is still a gap. Here is what we still do not know, right? You have to be explicit. Here is what we still don't know. We acknowledge that work has been done from paragraph 2, but paragraph 3 tells us that there is still a gap. So it is not enough. Take note that I said, what don't we know and why is it important that we do? So it's not enough just telling us there's a gap. Of course, there is a gap, but why should we care? For example, if you told us that no study has ever examined the rate or how long it takes ants to cross a road, your study is the first to establish that. Sure, there's a gap in knowledge, but that gap is completely trivial. It's completely irrelevant. So just because you are the first person or just because a gap exists doesn't mean that I, the editor-in-chief, should buy your idea. Remember that you're a salesman. Tell me there's a gap and tell me why that gap is important. So it's not enough to just, say there's a gap. No, there's a gap and here's why it's important, right? And this is where you talk about the importance of that gap in terms of either policy or practice or programs or how does it move the field forward. So that's your job. This is what you have to do there. So now, a gap doesn't mean that you have to go and reinvent a new field or there's nothing new under the sun, right? There's whatever you're doing, someone else has done it before. So that's the bad news. The bad news is there's nothing new under the sun. The good news, however, is that there is always a gap. Research simply means we're talking about something new, about something old. It's not as if we are going to reinvent a new topic. No. Other people have said something, but we are just adding a new voice. There is always a gap. And if you don't know how to capture the gap, you can simply use the interrogative pronouns, which is what, where, when, who, and how. So you can use what in the context of, for example, we have data for that product, but not this. So you're addressing the issue of what. Then the issue of where, this has been done there, but not here. So that addresses the issue of where. Then the issue of when, we have information for then, but not now. You're addressing the issue of time. Then who, we have data for that population, but not this. And then the issue of how, we did it that way, but not this better way. So those are examples of how you can address with the interrogative pronouns. Sorry, hold on a second, please. That was a cue to take over and finish the whole class. How come you're still waiting for me?
Why are you back? I was just about to.
Oh, please go ahead. Okay. All right. So that's how we can use the interrogative pronouns to address those issues. All right. Let's look at some do's and don'ts. So tell a story. So a story has a flow. Once upon a time, there's this star. Every story has a flow. There's a time element. There's a main actor, typically a bad guy, and then what he did. That's the same. A story is intriguing. It tells us how things move across time. So tell a story. Your paper shouldn't just, people have this idea that the paper should sound very dry and very robotic. No, it should tell a story from beginning to end. So when we say these topics, you should connect them. One idea or one section should flow into the other naturally, right? So that's required. So for do's, tell a story. And then be explicit. So research is about showmanship. It's not enough to say this study identifies, or this study, our aim for this study was to cure cancer, bring about world peace. Well, you've told us your aim, but you have not told us what gap you're addressing. So that's very important. So it's not enough to just fill a gap in knowledge. Tell us the gap explicitly. So far, we do not know this. Again, remember, you are a salesman. A salesman, your job is to point out the gap to me. I need to be convinced that what you're doing is non-trivial and to publish your work. So it's not enough for you to just say, oh, well, so I just came to tell you this. That's not what I want to hear. Tell us the gap and then tell us how you fill the gap or why that gap is important and how you're going to fill it. Keep it stimulating, please. The opening sentence of your part of your introduction is the most powerful sentence. Don't be like at CDC where we always start every report as smoking is the leading cause of preventable death. It's like, okay, I have heard this sentence a million times. I am a believer. I know smoking is the leading cause of death. Is there another way you can start this paragraph other than telling us smoking is the leading cause of death? Keep it stimulating, right? Because you want to grab my attention as the editor. I am your buyer, you are the seller. You want to make sure that I don't fall asleep at the first paragraph. So keep it stimulating. Now, I'm not saying you should go and write a poem or go and do some extra stuff. No. But you can start with things that are not necessarily everyday information. And that's the way to keep it, stimulating. Keep it short. Many journals would provide explicit guidance. I mean, editors at this point are tired of the authors writing like an entire thesis for an introduction. So many journals would have now impose word limits for introductions, right? For example, let's look at let me see, which journal should we look at for as a case study? Let's look at PCD, preventing chronic diseases, to show you how, when I say keep it short, what we mean in general. So PCD is one of CDC's leading journal. Let's see if we can find the instructions for about the author's corner, for example. Manuscript requirements. Title page, keywords, body, acknowledgements. Let's see. Search for the word introduction. All right. I'll share the link. You can go through. I think the PCD has one of the most explicit instructions for how to structure papers. So it's a great learning place for you to see just how, if I remember correctly, PCD, for example, structures, they require you that your introduction cannot be more than 300 words. See, 300 words is not a lot of words. 300 words, I will drop the link here and you can read it later on at your leisure, right? Look at it, take your time to look at some of the instructions that PCD provides to authors. Of course, this is not universal at all. This is just one journal, but it's the whole idea is to show you that it's when we say the introduction should be short, we mean it should be short. The introduction should not feel more than a page. So let's look at it, what we mean. Let me just put this text here and just repeat the same text. This is already, let's see, how many words is this? This is a full page. This is 383 words. This is just how much words are in a page, right? So an introduction of this length is already getting too long. We're at 534 words. You see, this is, and maybe this is because this is 1.5 spacing. Let's keep it at, oh, this is already at single spaced. This is already getting too long. This is definitely not acceptable. Like, if your introduction is spanning more than 2 pages, oh, this is definitely not acceptable. Like, this is at 534 words. Now, for those of you who have introductions that are 1,000 pages, 3 pages and running, that is clearly not acceptable. You know, that is way too long. So a good introduction should be just about this long. This is a good introduction. Like, you know, if you must make it extra, try to keep it under 500 words, right? That is what I would recommend as the ideal length of an introduction. 500 words or less. If you're going above anything above that, you are telling us stories at this point, and we really don't have patience and time to read your stories, you know. So keep it short and keep it sweet. So that's what I mean when I say keep it short, keep it to a page. And different journals will have different requirements, some more explicit than others. PCD, for example, requires 300 words, no more. Like, if it's more than 300 words, and you know what 300 words is? Let's just show you how long 300 words is. Let me just remove some random text here. This is 259 words. I removed too much. Let's see. So this is about 390. So when PCD says an introduction, this is what they're asking for. So you can see that when we say you are structuring it into 3 paragraphs, well, those are not extremely long paragraphs. Paragraph 1, why is this topic important? You don't have to tell long stories. And you don't have to tell us everything in the world about why it's important. Just pick the most important things and narrate them. Paragraph 2, what do we know about this topic? What have other previous studies done? This is not a literature review where you're going to say, so and so et al. Wrote this, and so et al. Wrote this, and keep writing pages upon pages. That's not what we're asking for, right? So here we're asking for a very concise summary of studies, 5 studies, 6 studies. That's more than enough. What, you know, recent studies, don't tell us studies that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? What is the gist? And those studies that you're providing here should be relevant and should build a case for paragraph 3. Remember, we said you should tell a story, meaning that the way you have articulated the current body of literature is done in a way that it's selective and it's well targeted and tells a story that leads up to this gap, because any given topic is very broad. There are very many dimensions to any given topic. We're not interested in all dimensions. We're interested in the dimension you are pursuing. So the studies you're going to provide here are those that build a case that lead up to your gap in knowledge and why it's important. So this is how you want to structure your introduction. By the way, but if it's not clear to anyone, this is just dummy text. This is not this is not actual text. So we're just grabbing some random text to make a point. So that's what you should do. These are the do's. The don'ts. Don't turn this in. This is not a systematic review. An introduction is not a systematic review. We just want to sip of the literature. We don't want to be drowned in the literature. Don't tell us the methods just yet. So some people, what they would do is in this paragraph here, the 3rd paragraph here, they will say, the goal of this study was to use a cross-sectional study with responses from 5,000 individuals to investigate. Well, hold on. We've not gotten to the methods yet. So why are you telling us that the goal of the study was to use cross-sectional design with participants from 25 countries to examine? No. Those are details that belong to the methods. So keep that for the method. So don't tell us anything that is not introduction in introduction. Keep that for the methods. Don't cite stale or outdated papers. Research is dynamic in nature. And so the way you provide evidence should also be reflective of that. Cite modern studies. Of course, there are always exceptions to every rule. If you are doing biological research where, let's say, you have some classic papers that have to be cited, well, that's a different thing. But in general, you want to look at, more recent evidence. And then, please, the goal of any form of communication, whether it's scientific manuscripts or any communication, is to inform. It's not to impress. And once you start using big words or just big grammar, jargon, you have completely lost the whole story. Da Vinci says, simplicity is the utmost sophistication. So please use small words. Don't use big words. Don't use technical words. Don't use jargon. The goal is to communicate in a way that is clear. The general advice is to write at a 12th grade reading level. So, or even less, try to target your writing at somebody who is, let's say, 15 years old, 16 years old, right? That's, a teenager. That's who you are. You have to keep in mind when you're writing. You're writing for this teenager. So if it's clear to you that this teenager will not understand what you're writing, then you have failed. So write in a way that is simple and straight to the point and understandable to your audience. All right, let's move on to the methods. The methods it's where you have to be a scientist, right? This is where you will be critiqued by your peers for using sound science or not. Your goal here is to make sure that your work is reproducible and scientifically defensible. Those are two things, right? Two different words. Reproducible means that if you describe it in sufficient detail, I should come and do the same thing and get the same answer. But the fact that it's reproducible doesn't mean that it's scientifically defensible. I can reproduce some nonsense that you did, right? That doesn't make it right. So for it to be to avoid creating work that is nonsensical, we have to make sure that our work is scientifically defensible. In other words, it should make sense. So those are two litmus tests that we have to pass: reproducibility and it being scientifically defensible. So it should pass the laugh test, right? The laugh test simply means if somebody reads this, will they burst out in laughter? Is it that ridiculous, right? Does it show that you have any basic knowledge of science or research? So again, methods is where you want to make sure that your work is, one, reproducible, but also scientifically defensible. It is not enough to tell us that you did so and so. The question is why? And this is particularly very important when you are using methods that are not everyday model methods. If you said, for example, authors or editors are generally used to reading, logistic regression. Now, if you come with a method that is not an everyday method, well, you have to explain why you used it, right? Are you just trying to be fancy, or is there a reason for using it? So explain what was your state of mind when you were doing this, right? So that we can understand and reproduce, but also understand the context or the reason why you did that. So based on our 3-item framework, the methods should have 3 sections. Junaidu, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. The methods should have 3 sections. One, the first section should be the study population or the data source. And again, here you're going to use interrogative pronouns: what, when, where, who, how, and how many. Again, don't try to be fancy. Just write out these questions and just answer them. What's the name of the survey? This survey was a global youth tobacco survey. Full stop. When? Which survey years are you using? I'm using data from year 2020 or 2021. Just put that. Data was from the year 2021. Full stop. Where? The survey was conducted in South Africa. Full stop. Who? The study population was youth aged 13 to 15 years old who were enrolled in school. How? How were they sampled? Participants were sampled with a multi-stage sampling, or they were selected with a convenience sample, or however they were selected. And how many of them? There were 2,550 participants who completed the questionnaires. Full stop. Now just put the sentences together. You don't have to sound eloquent or sound fancy. No. Just put the sentence. It should be straightforward, but it should contain all this information. That's all we ask for. Right? We're not awarding you a Nobel Prize in literature. We just want to have complete information for how the study was conducted. That's the first section, the data source. The second section is the variables in that data that we're analyzing. There are many ways you can look at this. You can look at it as primary and secondary outcome variables. You can look at it as exposure variables and control variables. You can look at it as dependent and independent variables. However you want to, whatever way you want to frame it is up to you. There's a lot of personal choice and preferences in writing, but all we ask is that just list the variables that were used and how they were defined, right? So it's important to capture how were they defined, conceptually, and how was it defined operationally. So, for example, if my primary outcome was smoking, I could say smoking was defined as, was as individuals who reported current use of tobacco use in the past 12 months. In our questionnaire, this was assessed with the question, blah, blah, blah. So you see here, I have done two things. I have provided the conceptual definition of smoking. I have also provided the operational definition. The conceptual definition is we define smoking as individuals who had smoked in the past 12 months. That's the conceptual framework. But then the operational, as obtains in my questionnaire, is in our questionnaire, this was assessed with the question, in the past 12 months, did you smoke? Or however it was assessed, we're going to capture that, So that's the way you want to define your variables. And this is not for all variables. This is just for the key variables. Make sure you provide the conceptual framework, but also the operational definition for the key variables. And then the last is the analysis. And for the analysis, I would recommend you use what I call the 1, 2, 3 approach to writing the analysis. Start with the one variable analysis, also known as the univariate analysis, then move to the two variable analysis, also called bivariate analysis, and then you move to the 3 or more variable analysis, which we call multivariable analysis, right? So one variable analysis has to do with single variables. Like this is just plain descriptive analysis of individual variables, the percentages, means, medians. In this study, 50% were males. Like, how do you get that number? Well, this is through univariate analysis, right? Means, percentages, and all of that. And then statistical tests. If you studied statistical tests, that's what we mean by two variable analysis. What kind of test did you use? Did you use parametric or non-parametric? Why did you use non-parametric? Again, if you're doing something that is unusual, you must provide justification for why you did it that way. So most studies will use parametric. So if you're going to use a non-parametric test, you have to tell us why it was used. Maybe the underlying assumptions were not met. Maybe the sample size was very small. You have to tell us something. It's not enough to just come up with a very unusual test. Like, you were saying you use a, I'm not sure what a Fisher's exact test, for example. We use the Fisher's exact test to assess, the relationship between these two variables. Now, it's not every day you're reading a paper and you come across the Fisher's exact test. It's not a very usual test, right? So if you're going to use that kind of unusual or rare non-parametric test, tell us why you used it, right? We used it because the sample size was small, and so the underlying assumptions were not met for a parametric test. Again, if you're using a one or two tail test, most studies will use a two-tail test. So if you end up using a one-tail test, obviously I want to know why you use a one-tail test. So don't just say we did a one-sided test, and just move on. Not move on, like come back. Like why did you do that? That is very unusual. It's not. So anytime you're doing something that is beyond the standard norms, you want to provide the reason why you did that. The same thing here with p-values, right? A standard that we use a p-value of 0.05 or alpha level. Now that is not saying that is written in stone. What we're saying is that if you now say we use the p-value of 0.01, tell us why you use that different standard. We just want to know. We're not saying that you should not use it. You should justify tell us why you did that. And then for multi-variable analysis, Bill, can you please mute yourself? Let me see if I can.
Okay.
Lungile, please, can you, okay. Can we kindly just mute ourselves? Let's practice good tech etiquette, please. So for multivariable analysis, again, you're describing type of regression models you used. Again, and why. Why are you using a negative binomial regression? Why? Why are you using a zero inflated Poisson? Like, why? Those are not usual. If it's something usual, you don't have to explain it. If it's, people in general understand enough about binary logistic regression, right? Or they understand linear regression enough to, so you don't need to explain those. But anytime you step into something that is unusual or unfamiliar to your readers, you should anticipate that it's going to sound unfamiliar to them, and you should provide explanation. And here's a simple rule of thumb. If you had to go and do research on it before writing that paper, well, then share the knowledge, explain why, so if it's a test or a procedure that was strange enough to you that you had to go and read up on it and read up, then you have to justify why, so that we also, who are in the readership, can understand why you did it. So these are the three sections of the methods. Now let's look at some basic do's and don'ts. Do's, use active language throughout, right? So what does that mean? Like, we analyze data, right? We assumed. Don't just say it was assumed. What do you mean it was assumed? Assumed by who? Like, you're making it sound as if, so don't speak like a politician. The politicians are the ones who will say an error was committed. Like, use active language. But when you're describing standard procedures, you don't have to use active language. Like, if you're talking about like weighting of data, like when we in complex survey design, we weight data, you don't have to say we weighted data. That actually sounds very awkward. You can say data were weighted to yield representative estimates. But in every other circumstances, especially when you're talking about what you did or what you assumed, once there's a cognitive task, you have to use active language, right? So don't just say it was assumed. We assumed that blah, blah, blah. Consistency is key. And this is how you know amateur writers. Amateur writers think that they have to provide you with a very flavorful writing so that they keep changing words. So here, let's say they define current cigarette smoking. That's a term, current cigarette smoking. In here, they might say current cigarette smoking. Next place, they might tell you about people who use cigarettes now and then. It's like, no, once you've defined a term, you should use that term consistently everywhere. I want to see current cigarette smoking here and there and all the 100 places that you're talking about current cigarette smoking. I don't want to see different versions of it, right? Consistency is key when you're talking about measures for your study. Each aim must have an approach. If your study had one aim, must have an approach for it. If you had two aims, it must be clear that there's an approach for each aim. And then you should consider using a flow diagram where applicable, so that a picture is more than 1,000 words, they say. Now, some don'ts. If everything is important, nothing is. Please, when you're describing your measures, your variables, don't describe every single variable in your data set. That is so unnecessary, and it's so unloving, because you have to force us to read all this information that we don't care about. Describe the key variables. The rest you can, if you feel a need to describe them, you can describe them in a supplemental table and put it in the appendix, right? Focus on only the key things that matter. Don't tell us the results yet. That's the reason why we have a section for it called the results. And people do this when they are describing, for example, the study population. They will say, data were collected among this population, 50% of them were males. No. Don't tell us the result. There's a section called the results, so you can put that there. However, the response rate and the sample belong in the methods. So you should report the response rate in the methods, as well as the overall sample size. Don't over-interrogate the data. So this means no excess subgroup or post-hoc analysis. If you're going to do post-hoc analysis, those have to be defined a priori, right? You also don't want to do too many subgroup analysis because that amounts to a fishing expedition. And please, we're in 2024, no such things as stepwise modeling or backward or forward. Regression analysis should involve a sound knowledge of the subject matter and should be based on strong theoretical foundations, right? So don't just relegate your duties to a computer and to just throw in variables into the computer and then tada, out comes a regression model. There has to be intellectual activity involved in selection of models. We're going to show you how to use the Chisquares platform to help you in this regard when you, for example, conduct your surveys, but we'll come to that in a minute. Now, the results section. The results section should perfectly mirror the methods. So you have the methods and the result. They should mirror each other. So the method said we did X, Y, and Z. The results should say, here are the results from X, Y, and Z that we did. They must mirror each other. So there are two sections of the manuscript that are supposed to be perfect mirror images of each other. The introduction and the discussion should mirror each other. The introduction says, this is an important issue. Here is the gap. The discussion says, oh, the gap that we mentioned earlier, here is what we found. Here's how it has filled the gap, and here's why it's important. So introduction, discussion mirror each other. Methods, results also mirror each other, right? You have to write in an opinion-free manner, right? So that's very important. Now, the 3 paragraphs of the results. First paragraph, describe the background characteristics and prevalence. So paragraph 1, we're saying this is percentage of adults by whatever, the characteristics, and you provide the key prevalence estimates for the outcomes of interest. Paragraph 2, you talk about the bivariate analysis. So remember, we talked about the 1, 2, 3 approach in the methods. 1 is just the univariate analysis. 2 is bivariate. 3 is multivariable. That's the exact same thing. Remember, we said they're going to be mirror images of each other. The same way you did it, that's the same way you're going to report it. 1, 2, 3 for methods. 1, 2, 3 for results. So paragraph 2, bivariate analysis and unadjusted analysis. Paragraph 3, multivariable analysis. Now, the do's and don'ts. The do's, use the 1, 2, 3 rule for decimal places. We report percentages to 1 decimal place. We report odds ratios to 2 decimal places. We report p-values to 3 decimal places. Follow the 30 precision rule. If you're using large complex survey data, we only report estimates from subgroups with at least 30 individuals or with relative standard errors of less than 30. Otherwise, you end up with estimates that have very wide confidence intervals or otherwise imprecise. Again, you're going to follow the same order as you did in the methods. Methods, 1, 2, 3 approach, 1 variable analysis, 2 variable analysis, 3 variable analysis. That is the exact same way you're going to report your results. 1 variable analysis, 2 variable analysis, 3 variable analysis, each of which will be a paragraph of its own. Now, some people imagine that when we talk about results, it is only the main text. So let's copy this text. This is the introduction. This is the results. They're jumping this is our results here. Now, some people imagine that this section called the results is the only place you have to provide results. No, that is completely wrong. Results can appear in 1 of 4 places. Number 1, results can be put here. Number 2, results can be put in tables and figures, tables, and then in figures, and then in supplemental material. These are all results. It doesn't have to be here for it to be results. The text here should be the high level, the most important things. Every other thing, you can leave it here, or here, or here. And you want to make sure that these 4 parts are not redundant, right? You know, they're not repetitive of each other. So, but these are all 4 places where you can put results. It completely defeats the whole purpose where everything here is exactly what's here. And it's like, okay, we have actually seen the results the first time you put it there. Why are you showing us again here, and then here, and then there? So that's one of the flaws you find in writing. where results are just repeated over and over. So keep only the key findings in the main text. The others can be kept in tables and figures, which must stand alone. Cannot emphasize that enough. Tables and figures must stand alone. I think we have a section on tables and figures, but here is what we mean when we say things must stand alone. Let's go to MMWR. MMWR, smoking. Let me see if I can find any article on that. All right, so the MMW, sorry, I keep going to CDC's articles because they are just a great standard on how things should be done. So this table here, so this is a great table that is able to stand alone. Let me pull the PDF. I think it's just easier to see it in PDF form. So this is the table. Characteristics of adults aged 18 years who reported tobacco product use every day or some days by tobacco products and quit rates. National Health Interview Survey, United States, 2021. What do you find here? This table contains three major things. Apart from a topic, it contains elements of person, place, and time, right? You can see everything there. We know this is the National Health Interview Survey. This is the individuals in that. That is a person. And you also know, we're also told percentage of adults aged 18 years or older. So we know the person, the population captured. We know the data source, we know the country or the location, and we know the time. Person, place, and time. We cannot talk about writing without mentioning it's like a song. Person, place, and time. We sing it all the time, right? When we say your table should stand alone, the title must contain elements of person, place, and time independently. Then that is not all. See all these footnotes and items here and all the variables, the way you're defining them. You have a footnote where they're all defined. In other words, I should be able to read this table by itself without having to go to the main text to say, oh, how did this person even define current cigarette smoking? Oh, the footnote is here. Current cigarette smoking was defined as smoking 100 or more cigarettes during a person's lifetime and now smoking cigarettes every day or some days. That has been clearly defined. I don't have to go. Of course, it was defined in the manuscript itself too, right? They would absolutely have defined it here in this text. Current cigarette smoking was defined as having ever smoked 100 or more cigarettes and smoking every day or some days at the time of the survey. This is defined. I don't have to go to the text to know the definition. Why? Because if I mention it in the table, I must provide a footnote to describe it in that table so that the table is able to stand alone, right? So that's what we mean when we say that you can keep other findings in the table which must stand alone. Then what are some don'ts for the results? Don't say almost significant. Statistical significance is like pregnancy. You are either pregnant or you're not. You are not. There's no such thing as you're almost pregnant. Like it's binary. So things like marginally significant or trending towards significant. That's a hard no. Don't use adjectives. Don't cherry pick. Don't report results and say many participants were what XYZ, right? That's not appropriate. And also don't be subjective. Don't use language that shows subjectivity, right? Things that show any emotional outage is not allowed in the results. So don't say like, oh, we were alarmed, we were shocked to find that. No, that's not balanced language, right? Just report the results. That's why we said in the results, you must be a robot. A robot is not shocked or amazed or alarmed. So please don't use those expressions in the results. Just say 20% of adults were XYZ. Don't say we were alarmed to find, that does not belong in scientific writing. In the results section, there's a place to be alarmed, and it's called a discussion. In the results, don't be alarmed, don't be shocked, don't be amazed, don't be happy. Just report the findings the way they were, and the exact same way a robot will do so. And then if you're using complex survey data, don't say participants if data were weighted, because remember that when you weight data, it shifts inference from the sample to the target population. And please don't show only p-values. We've talked about this many, many times before. if you show a p-value, you must show what is being compared, either a percent, set of percentages or odds ratios or something. You can't just show p-values and no. That's wrong. Now, let's talk about the discussion. The discussion is based on the premise that data cannot speak for themselves, right? Somebody has to interpret the data and tell us what it is. Now, remember we said in the results, please don't tell us you were alarmed or shocked. If you're alarmed, keep your alarm to yourself. This is where you can be alarmed, right? You're now interpreting the data in your own voice so that you are giving meaning to the data. And so 3 paragraphs here for the discussion. Paragraph 1, summarize a high level of the 3 most important findings and their implication. Always assume that somebody will not read your paper to the end. So don't wait till the end to discuss the implications of your finding. If you were to select one paragraph in the whole manuscript and say that this is the most important paragraph, it will be the first paragraph of the discussion. Why? Because that paragraph contains a summary of the key findings. It also contains the implications of the findings for public health, for policy, for clinical care, whatever it is we're talking about. So that's why it's the most important paragraph. So if I had time to just read one paragraph, I would just go to the first paragraph of discussion, right? So let's go back to this MMWR, for example. The discussion here. In 2021, approximately 1 in 9 US adults aged 18 years or older currently smoke cigarettes, right? And discussing some other things consistent with the declines during recent decades, blah, blah, blah. And then it's explains some things, and then let's go ahead. So it talks here that in addition to continuous surveillance of tobacco product use, it is equally important to monitor use of combinations of tobacco products to characterize multi-product use trends, right? It ends with one key implications or the recommendations from the study. So don't just say, I'm going to wait to the end and then I'll talk about the implications. Always assume that somebody will not have patience or time to read the paper to the end. But if the goal of the paper was to communicate and move to action, you should use that opportunity in the first paragraph of the discussion to summarize the key findings and also mention the implications for public health policy. And then the second paragraph is where you explain unexpected results and you compare studies. Please don't state the obvious. If you say that, lung cancer rates were higher among smokers compared to non-smokers, that's expected. So save the discussion for things that are unexpected, right? Things that and what do you mean by unexpected? Well, there's an unanticipated null or significant associations. You were really, really surprised to see that there was no association, because from every other context, you expect to see significant associations. Or the reverse, you expected to see no association, but you saw a significant association. Or you saw effect modification or subgroup differences, which were rather surprising. There was unanticipated magnitude. So maybe you understood or you expected to see a significant association, but the magnitude of that association was rather surprising. Or the direction of the association. You expected that smoking would be associated with increased risk for XYZ, but it turned out that smoking was protective. That's an unexpected finding that should be discussed. Or you find that in contrast to previous studies, your studies saw that instead of smoking prevalence going down, it's going up. That's a reversal of trends. Or that gaps or disparities between certain groups are widening. All of those are unexpected findings that we want to discuss. Or in your manuscript, you saw some findings that appear incoherent or inconsistent. You should discuss them, right? So paragraph 2 is where you explain unexpected results and you compare studies. You are looking at how your study may have deviated from other studies and what might explain. Again, it's not enough for you to explain that there is this unexpected finding. Why? Like, you have to provide an explanation. To go back to that MMWR, let's see how they might have done that here. So you see, consistent with the declines during recent decades, the prevalence of cigarette smoking decreased during 2020 to 2021. Comprehensive tobacco control strategies at the national, state, and local levels likely contributed to the lower cigarette smoking prevalence. So they have found a way to explain why they may have seen what they saw. So it's not enough for you to just say, oh, wow, we saw this shocking finding, and then you just move on. No, no, no. Come back. Tell us, what do you think contributed to that finding, right? And here are some of the things that could be explanations for unusual findings. It could be economic, it could be social, it could be statistical, it could be demographic, it could be geographic, temporal, technological, it could be policy, whatever it is. You make an effort to explain it, and notice the word they used here, likely. We're not sure. It's not as if we're saying that is for sure, but we are proffering an explanation for the observation that we found. That's what you do in paragraph 2. In paragraph 3, you provide your limitations for your study. And don't say your study doesn't have limitations. There are always limitations. Limitations could arise from the design of a study. That is, limitations are inherent in the study design. So if you're using a cross-sectional survey, there are already designs, limitations are inherent in that design. Like, the fact that it's just cross-sectional means that both exposure and outcome were captured at the same point in time. And so we cannot make any conclusions about whether the exposure came first or the outcome came first. We don't know. The fact that it's self-reported always means that there's likelihood for misclassification, right? And those are some of the limitations that are inherent in the design. There may also be limitations that are inherent in analysis. If we had small sample size, what implication does that mean? So it's not enough for you to just say our sample size was small. Okay, that is not interesting. It's not very it's not crafted like a professional. Like, what, from the perspective of epidemiology, why is that a limitation, right? So please don't just tell us sample sizes were small. Say sample sizes were small, and so the results would have lower precision. Or if it's a comparative analysis, it's possible that we run into the issue of type 2 error, which is differences existed in nature, but our study cannot detect them because we might be underpowered. So again, explain the epidemiologic manifestation of whatever you deem to be limitation. And then there could also be limitations from interpretation. So if we're looking at cross-sectional designs, we know that we cannot fully disentangle time period and cohort effects from the data. And so we want to be mindful of those kind of limitations that arise. Some basic do's and don'ts. The goal of a discussion is to synthesize, to interpret, and to apply. So don't just restate your findings. This is a very common problem you see in discussions. People just rewrite the results in another form. They just write it. No, that's not the point of the discussion. It's not just to rewrite it and just write it again. It's to synthesize it. So what does it mean, and how do we apply it? Also, you should always be uncertain, right? It's always a bad thing in science to be very, very certain, right? Like this, don't use expressions like this means that. No, this might mean, this could mean, this may mean. Show some degree of uncertainty that there are other alternative explanations that might exist other than what you have proffered. Then focus more on significant findings. Remember, the cardinal rule is the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So if you're doing a regression analysis, for example, don't go to town talking about results that were non-significant. How do you know that this is not a case of type 2 error? So just focus more on significant findings and acknowledge the fact that there might be possibility of type 2 error in your findings. When you talk about your limitations, first of all, don't give us a full page of limitations. This is what you see in the limitation section. Some people will write like 2 solid paragraphs of limitation, which begs the question, if the study has so many limitations, why did you do it? Like, that's a natural question I'll ask, right? So limitations should be, let's show an example here. A short paragraph, So here, for example, the findings in this study are subject to at least 5 limitations. 5 is always a good number to stay at. It's just a right. So I was always recommend stay between 3 to 5 limitations. Anything less than 3 is like, are you even aware of the limitations of your study? Like, are you familiar with, issues of study design, and are you not aware that those limitations even exist in the first place? And anything more than 5 is like, wow, this study has a lot of limitations. Like, why should we even publish it in the first place if it has so many holes? So that's one way to frame it. Like, so I always recommend between 3 to 5 limitations. That's always a good space. Nothing less, nothing more. So, and if you mention limitations, it's also good to argue why they're not fatal. So if you go back to the MMWR, let's see. So this is a good example of this second limitation. This is a very, very excellently worded limitation. Second, responses to questions were self-reported and were not validated by biochemical testing. However, self-reported smoking status has been determined to correlate with serum cotinine levels. See, they said, well, our study may have limitations by virtue of being self-reported, but then they followed up quickly and said, this limitation is not fatal because we know from past studies that there's a strong correlation between self-reported and biochemically validated smoking status. So even though it's self-reported, yeah, we're good. That's what they're saying in effect. And so that's what you want to do. Now, some don'ts. Please don't provide new results in discussion. What some people do is that they will say, data not shown. If it was important, why didn't you show it? And if you didn't show it, why are you telling us that it was not shown? So only discuss what was reported in the results. Don't overstep your boundaries. Don't overinterpret results. Don't use causal language. Don't be overly critical of past work. It's fine that they may have made some error, but that doesn't mean that you want to shame them, right? And also remember, they may even be your reviewers. But even if they're not your reviewers, there's no point shaming people. It's fine. I'm not saying that you should not point out issues with past work, but you should do it in a way that is professional and that is not, that doesn't necessarily put people down. And then don't list too many limitations, as we said. Conclusion should have three sentences. And what you're trying to do is summarize, interpret, apply. So 1 sentence to summarize, 1 sentence to interpret, 1 sentence to apply. And here you are showing that you are a sage. You have something to, you are an elder statesman who can show us the way, like provide recommendations for where we should go from here. Sentence 1, summary. Remember we said summarize, interpret, apply. So first sentence is summary, top line. And try not to use numbers. Try to use adjectives or fractions. So we found 56% higher odds of outcome Y among group A than B. Prevalence of outcome Y was 2-fold higher. See, I'm reporting numbers, but I'm not using like the actual values. I'm framing it in a way that is, just lighter and easier to understand. And overall, 2 in 5 youth aged 13 to 15 years reported XYZ. I'm summarizing the key findings. So in other words, if there was one finding that I was going to say this is the most important finding, that's what I'm going to report in there. Then second sentence, what does this mean? So first sentence, you are just explicitly stating what you found or what the study found. But what does it mean, right? So it means that this finding means that XYZ, that it's clear from this finding that this policy is not working or that inequalities are increasing. So in other words, you are looking beyond the surface and saying, oh, in real world practice, this is the implication of this finding. This is what this means in the real world. First sentence was, this is what this means on paper. This is what we found on paper. Second sentence is, this is what we found. This is what this means in the real world. And the third sentence is, what do we do with this information? How could this be used? So summarize, interpret, apply. What is the application of this? So this means that enhanced and sustained efforts are needed to improve surveillance or to increase enforcement and compliance of this law, or we need to pass this bill into law, or we need to target minority groups to increase utilization of services, right? So you have to, again, summarize, interpret, apply. 1 sentence each. So what are some of the basic do's and don'ts? Keep it short, please. We don't want stories. Keep it short. Again, like I said, 1 sentence for each of the 3 is fine. 1 sentence to summarize, to interpret, and then to apply. Less is more. Please don't speculate. Keep it data-driven. It should be based on the data. It should be action-oriented. Remember that Summarize, interpret, apply. Apply means action. You must tell us to do something. You know, it's not enough to say more research should be done. No, 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 no. What should, the research that you have done, what should we do with it? That's what we're asking, right? It should be action oriented. You must tell us an action point from your data, and then it should be cohesive, right? They interpret or summarize, interpret, apply. They should segue into each other very naturally. Do not provide new results in conclusion. Whatever you report in conclusion should have been reported earlier. Don't just restate your findings. Again, summarize, interpret, apply. Don't insert references. This is not, we're not talking about any previous studies. This is about your study. That's why you cannot have references in the conclusion. Because we're not talking about any other studies. We're talking about your study. Summarize, interpret, apply. There's nothing in those three items that suggests, even remotely, that we have to convey information from previous studies. We're talking about you now, your study. And please, we've already called it conclusion. Don't say in summary or in conclusion. It's obvious from the heading that this is a conclusion. All right, abstract and title. This is the most important part of a manuscript because this is the first thing that the reader is going to see. This is the first thing, if someone is doing a systematic review, this is what they're going to search for first, the title and the abstract. You should write this last. Write everything first, and this is what we're presenting it last too, because logically, that's the last thing to be written. So you want to keep the titles short, 15, 20 words, keep the abstract to 250, except if it's a different format specified by the journal. You want to comply with journal requirements on length and structure. There are many, many structures for abstracts, from unstructured to different lengths of sections, or just obey the instructions. You want to make sure that there are the elements of person, place, and time. Again, if that's one thing you learned from this class today, person, place, and time. This is epidemiology. This is what epidemiology is all about, the science of person, place, and time. Those elements must show up everywhere. In the title, you must see elements of person, place, and time. Again, look at this title. Let's go back to MMWR. This is just a random, MMWR, but you see, tobacco products used among adults, United States, 2021, person, place, time, right? This is how professionals write. It should be obvious to me from just this that this is what it's all about. If there's an abstract, let's look at the abstract. MMWRs have an interesting way of writing abstracts. This is the summary. Again, you can. I'll share the link with you, but pick any standard paper from any renowned journal, and you will see you can learn from the style of writing: person, place, and time. Title, the abstract, the table headers, everything should be independent. You should have a reflection of person, place, and time consistently. And then write both last. What are some of the don'ts? Don't show no results shown only in abstract. So if you showed results in abstract, those results must also be shown in the main text. It's completely not allowed to show results in abstract that were not shown anywhere else in the paper, right? The abstract is just a mini summary of the paper. So you can see why it doesn't make sense to do that. Don't summarize the paper in the title. Sometimes you read the title and you're like, okay, is this like an encyclopedia? Are you trying to summarize the paper? It's like evidence that smoking is associated with, or smoking causes 20% reduction. It's like, oh wow, that's an interesting title. So please don't do that. Don't insert references in the abstract, because the abstract is supposed to focus on your work, not on the work of other people. And please don't try to be cute or goofy in the title. Some people try to introduce like poems or rhymes in it just makes the work look very unprofessional, and it detracts from the seriousness of the work. So please don't do that. And so write right. The first draft should be horrible, right? Never submit the first draft. If you submitted the first draft of the work, you did it wrong. It means that you either did not follow the principles of FBR, or you just do not pay attention to quality. That's the only two interpretations we can draw from that. Write in a way that is clear, cohesive, coherent, concise, and convincing. And remember that writing is both a science and an art. So The science means that, of course, it's based on science and principles of science, but it's also an art because, like any other art, you get better with practice. So my recommendation or my encouragement is that at any given point in time, you should be writing at least 2 papers. You should be working on at least 2 papers because that's how you develop the art component, like, by practice and doing over and over. So in that regard, I have my concluding poem for you here, which is called Doing the Thing. And it goes as this: preparing to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Scheduling time to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Making a to-do list for the thing isn't doing the thing. Hitting on yourself for not doing the thing isn't doing the thing. Hitting on other people who have done the thing isn't doing the thing. Hitting on the obstacles in your way of doing the thing isn't doing the thing. Fantasizing about all the adoration you'll receive once you do the thing isn't doing the thing. The only thing that is doing the thing is doing the thing. So again, it applies to writing because, yeah, if you want to write, you got to schedule time. You got to do the thing, right? Because it's not easy. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it. But that's the story for today. I'll stop here and take questions.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Okay, I'll read the first question and people can raise their hands. Okay, I think there are 3. Okay. How do you balance between being simple, simplicity, and matching with the target audience? Scientists, for example.
Okay, that question assumes that scientists don't like simplicity. So the mantra is as simple as possible, as complex as necessary, but always reproducible, right? That's the mantra we've mentioned in our classes over and over and over. Keep it as simple as possible, but sometimes it might need to be complex because maybe just there's no other way around it. As simple as possible, as complex as necessary, but you must ensure you're reproducible. So your goal, but it starts with your intention at the beginning. Your intention should be to be as simple as possible. Don't come to the paper with the intention of, oh, I'm going to show you guys that I'm a very sophisticated superstar. At that point, you know that we're in trouble, all of us, because your paper will not be simple, right? You're not going to come. Like, look at the MMWR again, right? Just look at it. Look at the style of writing. There's nothing in this paragraph that is remotely complicated. It is just basic language. It's simple words that anybody can understand. When you now start talking about into the world of jargon, something is seriously wrong. So that's the balance. Come with the mindset that I'm going to make this as simple as possible. But then if I need to do something complicated, I would, of course, have to do it. But the default should be that I want to do something simple.
Thank you, Prof. Someone said, I thought the pronoun I or we should be used sparingly.
So, well, depends on the context or the requirements in your, I don't know whether that's what the university requires of thesis, but no, we prefer active language. Active language is good. We did this. And if you write the paper alone, don't say we. It's like, okay, do you have like multiple personality disorder or what? So, but no, we encourage people to use active language because it brings the paper to life. It shows a sense of ownership that don't say it was assumed. It was assumed by who? Like, who made the assumption? Like, we assumed, or I assumed, if I single author, that now we're knowing who is doing what. So we encourage that. We encourage active language, not passive language, because it should be clear who is doing what.
Thank you. There's also a comment. Most papers report response rates under results section.
So again, different standards apply different places, right? But in general, so let's look at, for example, the MMWR here. It talks about NHIs and annual. This is the methodology. In 2021, a total of these individuals were surveyed. See, the N is here, and the response rate is here, and then it is continuous with the methodology. They were weighted, and so on. So this is standard in terms of epidemiologic practice. This is the gold standard. Now, if your journal says something else, or if your university says something else, please do what they've asked, but in standard epidemiologic writing, the methodology, and it makes sense, right? Where do we come across the N, the sample size or the response rate? Those are metrics that are acquired during the methodology. They're not part of your results from the analysis. They're things you get from the field. So anything that is gotten from the field stays in the methodology. Everything that we get from your analysis stays in the results. That's the philosophical basis for it. We don't get the response rate or the sample size from your analysis. Those things are acquired from the field, and hence they're reported in the methodology section. But again, like I said, if you're whatever your institution tells you to do, please just go ahead. But you also need to know how to do things the right way, the standard way.
Thank you. Could you please throw more light on the conceptual framework?
So we're talking about the definition of variables. So let's see if for every given thing, let me just give an example in the Word document. So we're talking about defining things conceptually as well as operationally. Let's expand this. So let's say for cigarette smoking, the example here, we're saying cigarette smokers or current cigarette smoking So this is conceptually, we're saying we're defining current cigarette smokers as people who smoked at least once in the past 12 months. Now, this is the concept. The concept is that, yeah, we're going to look at people who smoked in the past 12 months and we're going to call them cigarette smokers. Now, let's move past concept. The concept is simply an idea. That's what a concept means. So when we say conceptual definition, we're saying, what's the big idea behind what we're doing? Oh, the idea is that we're going to define them as people who smoked at least once in the past 12 months. But then operationally means in your questionnaire, how did you get to this idea? Like how, let's come out from the world of ideas and let's come into the real world. The real world is called operations, right? Questionnaires and all of that. Operationally, how did you define it? You know, in our questionnaire, this was defined as a response of X, Y, Z to the question, blah, 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 right? So here, if you just provided this second part, if you just said in our questionnaire, smokers were defined as a response of X, Y, Z to blah, 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 we're like, what are you trying to get at exactly? That's the question we're going to ask you. That's why you have to provide both definitions. You tell us that conceptually, we're defining smoking as use of cigarettes on at least one occasion in the past 12 months. We're like, oh, we see, we understand, and we agree. Okay, now tell us in your questionnaire, how did you get to this definition? And so that's what we mean by providing both the conceptual definitions as well as operational definitions.
Thank you. So everyone who has their hand up, I will let you ask your questions. I just want to finish reading the questions that were posted much earlier on because I normally miss them. What if it's a qualitative research study? In a recent submission, the reviewer suggested that I use qualitative terms such as many, few, to describe the socio-demographic characteristics of participants instead of in percentages.
Yeah, they are right. So in qualitative study, this applies to quantitative studies. A qualitative study, you can't say you did a qualitative study and then you use quantitative metrics. So in qualitative studies, you're allowed to use those kind of things like many or whatever because it's qualitative. And those expressions are qualitative expressions. So that is fine. So you cannot use quantitative methods to that kind of context. So that is absolutely correct from the reviewers.
How can the first paragraph of the discussion be distinguished from the results section, in bracket text form of reporting results?
Because it can be distinguished because we are not looking at all the results. We're looking at the key results. So let's look at an article from PCD, for example, so we can see what we're talking about. PCD, smoking cigarettes. This is just a random paper. I don't know what I'm going to find, but let's just see. All right. So this is what it says. Across US states in 2016, prevalence of current tobacco use varied most for cigarettes, followed by smokeless tobacco and e-cigarettes. See, they are synthesizing the most important findings. 3 states, blah, 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 were among the top 10 states with the highest prevalence for all assessed tobacco product types. And they proceed. And then, as the tobacco product landscape continues to diversify, these findings underscore the importance of sustained monitoring and reporting of adult tobacco use across tobacco product types to help inform comprehensive tobacco use prevention and control strategies. So again, remember that the point of the paragraph, first paragraph, is simple. What are the key top findings from your study? You're not necessarily reporting verbatim, right? This results cut across. See how these results cut across different sections. Now synthesize. What is the take-home message from all of these things you've presented? We're not saying you should repeat it verbatim. We're saying you should synthesize it and tell us what are the key. If somebody has just 1 minute to read the whole study, what will you tell them is the most important finding? And that is what has to be summarized in this first items here, which is what you've done here. And then when you are done with that, then what is the implication? How can that move policy, or what should we do with that information? That is the second part here. So the first paragraph has 2 parts. The part that distills the most important finding from the whole study and tells us in 1 or 2 or 3 sentences at most, and then the part that tells us what that means, right? So that's how you want to structure the first paragraph of your discussion. And again, these are not rules, right? You can do, but these are just frameworks to help you guide. For those who are new to writing, supposed to give you a framework to think. So somebody say, oh, but I don't want to write that way. Yeah, you can do whatever you want, like. But for those who are new to writing, this is just meant to give you a framework to think about how to put together a manuscript.
Thanks, Prof. When you talk about 3 of everything rule, is the table referring to all the figures and tables, or tables only, and there should be figures as well?
We're saying tables and all figures. So keep it minimum, right? For example, there's a reason why one of the top journals, Journal of Pediatrics Journal. The thing is that the ability to communicate in very simple form is an art, right? That you should practice. So even if you're allowed to provide so many tables and figures, that doesn't mean that you just want to do all of that, right? And so look at, this is a very good journal also that you want to look at the structure of their requirements. Let me see if I can quickly find that. So the pediatrics, for example, allow only 3 tables, right? In their manuscripts. So so it's a good practice, I think, that you have less amount of tables and of figures required. So when I said 3, I meant 3 tables or figures. So that means it could be 2 tables, 1 figure, 3 tables, and 3 tables and no figures, or 3 figures and no table. But that's what I mean by that. So I'm going to leave you with this to also just read in your leisure to see what is required in this journal, for example. It's a good journal to look at the requirements. All right, any other question?
Thank you. I'll read the last one and then I'll move to the hands. How can you navigate between paragraph 2 of discussion and don't of discussion, of focusing on significant findings? Kindly share more light. How can you navigate between paragraph 2 of the discussion and don't of discussion.
And the what?
Of focusing.
And the don'ts of
Riri,
the
can you just
discussion
post it?
of
Riri, can you post the question again, please? Okay. In the meantime, let me let Abdullahi.
Hello, good evening, sir. Good evening, Prof.
hello.
Am I audible, Prof?
Yes, clearly.
Thank you so much, Prof. I can't explain how excited I am about all you have been teaching us in the last couple of weeks, including the ones I missed. I've tried to do some catch up, and I'm going to ask a question which might seem a little bit inappropriate, but I think it's still useful here regarding what you discussed when you were talking about the introductory part. That when you want to talk about what had been done previously and what is missing. I'm trying to do a research, and the previous works I've done actually were more of retrospective studies, but I was thinking of doing the within a different study design, like a cross-sectional or a perspective. Could that could that be a gap or a justification for my research, given that I could be able to elucidate more aspects of the study itself, use a different approach?
Yeah,
That's my
absolutely. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
Okay, sir. That was my first question. And the other question was regarding when you said it's not advised to put terms like nearly significant. For example, when trying to discuss an association between two parameters. One of the things I looked at in my research was something I thought would be an association, but in previous research, the p-value, well, it wasn't less than 0.05, but it was just above it. I was thinking if that could be something I could also pursue in my own research. Perhaps there could be some slight difference which can be significant in my own research. So I don't know if such near significant findings are enough reason to talk about in trying to make a case for one's research. Those are my two questions, bro.
All right, sure, thanks. So yes, in the first question, you can use one of the interrogative pronouns was, how. We did that way, or it has been done that way, but not this better way. So if, for example, previous studies have examined the relationship with retrospective cohort data, and you want to do a prospective cohort, then you can say, yes, there's justification because the other studies have done it this way. And here's the problem. The design, while valuable, have inherent limitations. For example, with the retrospective cohort data, we have the issue of time biases, right? And since we are interviewing people, there might be interviewer, biases also that come into play, where cases might, let's say we're doing a case control study, cases might recall issues more than controls because they are affected, right? So it's not enough to just say they did retrospective and we are going to do a prospective. You have to argue what is wrong with the retrospective, what's wrong with what are the implications or the constraints that arise from the designs, and what does your own design address. Now, take note, it says they did it this way, but we're doing it this better way. You cannot go downhill. If previous studies were better design, you can't say, oh, here I'm going to offer a worse design because nobody has done it worse than this. No. It has to be a better way. So they can't, studies could have done it in for example, even a retrospective cohort study. And then you are saying that, you know what, I want to do a cross-sectional study to answer that question, because no, a cross-sectional study is inferior to a retrospective cohort study. So if you are trying to build on the body of evidence with that argument, then maybe you have to find another argument. It can't just be because they did it in retrospective cohort and I want to do the cross-sectional, but the cross-sectional is worse off than a retrospective cohort. So you are better off looking for another argument than saying that study based on study design, because that argument falls flat. Then the issue of statistical significance, again, there is no such thing as when the problem comes when we are chasing p-values or almost significant, like It's almost as if we're trying to catch that p-value, and we're trying so hard to catch it by any means necessary. The goal of research should not be to pursue p-values, but to search for meanings that have clinical relevance or relevance in whatever domain we work in, right? So the more we shift away from p-values, the better we all are, because there's no inherent value to being very rather obsessive about p-values. And definitely the idea of almost significant is dead on arrival, because it makes no sense. It makes no sense because we already declared that this is going to be a threshold to assess significance. So it's binary. It's significant or not significant. And then right in the middle, we're now introducing new terms that we not include in the contract. We're now introducing new terms like almost significant. No. We can't be moving the goalpost. It's binary, significant or not significant. That is the only terms we want to hear, right? No such thing as marginal significant. Why? Because we're moving the goalpost now. But you can argue for the cost you can argue for justification for your study based on things that don't have to do with p-values. That's the point I'm trying to say.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, Prof.
You're welcome.
There are some conferences that request for an abstract first for presentation, then request for the manuscript sometime later. But you said we should write the abstract last. This is contradicting, sir, Prof. Please help clear base on your array of knowledge.
Okay, so everything is obviously context dependent. You are talking about an entirely different context from what we're talking about. We're talking about when you're writing an abstract for a manuscript. What you described a very different scenario where you said they asked for you for an abstract and then later on you wrote a paper, which is a different thing. And even in that context, the abstract you may have written first will not necessarily align with the paper you just wrote, because you will have to write another abstract. The abstract for that paper will likely be very different from the abstract you submitted. Why? Because when you were trying to submit the abstract for that work, for this conference, you just did some quick analysis. When you do the more deeper dive into the data, you'll find out things that you did not have initially. So you will end up having to write the abstract again, but again, you're going to write the abstract last, because how in the world can you write the abstract first? The abstract means everything has been done, and the abstract is simply, the word abstract, simply means that it's an abstracted version of the manuscript, the full thing. So it can be written first. It's just impossible to write it first. It has to be written last.
Thank you. Charles?
Hello, Prof. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so like when you said that there's one word you kind of sounded like a politician at some point when you said, well, if your university says this, well, do that, but again, you should know the standards. This is the standard how it's supposed to be. So to that, there's something that happened that we were having a discussion in school, and one of the prof was more or less I kind of insisting on SMART, on that acronym SMART, that your topic must be SMART. So, and this always comes up. You can see it clearly whoever this professor is supervising. So you see this kind of very lengthy titles, topic titles or titles, yeah, research titles. And personally, when I look at it, I say they are too long. So in that kind of scenario now, how do we now marry, looking at people, place, and time? Yes, you also reflect in that, SMART acronym. But how do that our topic is not too lengthy, but also, contains all the component of SMART, like being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound as well. Over.
All right, this is, so one way to practice is you can this is where you can use ChatGPT. Take your extremely long title, feed ChatGPT with examples of short titles, and tell it, please narrow down this long title of mine to what you have seen in the previous examples I showed you. And it can help you. So that's one way to do it. That could be efficient and practical for you to execute. But like I said, if that's your supervisor, so again, your goal is not to start an intellectual, it's not to win a competition or to win an argument. If you're a student, your goal is to graduate. That's your primary responsibility you have, to graduate, right? And if your school says you should write, this is how they want things written, that they want the conclusion first, and then they want the methods next, and then they want whatever way they say, just that's how you should do it. This is not the point to make it prove a point. If that's the standard in your institution, please go ahead. Write the references first as they require. And then they like whatever, no matter how ridiculous the format is, that is the institution's format, and that is what has. If you now bring enough format, you will never graduate. Your goal as a student is to graduate, and then you can do things however way you want. But if that's the format required by institution, then please, by all means, do it. If institution requires that a title must be 50 words, please, by all means, make it that, right? But then you should also know that when you graduate and come into the real world, the rest of the world doesn't align with your school standards. They do things differently. So it's good for you to know how to do things the right way, but it's also important for you to graduate as well. So it's about knowing, this is now just being savvy and knowing how to satisfy your institution, but also learn how to do the right things.
Thanks, Prof. Talking about writing a manuscript, some time ago, Prof, you spoke about salami slicing. Isn't an objective be enough for a manuscript? Or if I have about 5 objectives in a study, must I report all the 5 in a single manuscript?
So you said your introduction, you said your study has these 5 objectives, but you don't know the things that once you say it, you are committed to it. If you say your study has 5 objectives or 5 aims, but first of all, we'll come to the issue of why your study has 5 aims later. But for now, let's just stick with that argument. If you have 5 aims that you're set to establish, we should see 5 methodologies for the 5 different aims. We should see all the 5 results for the 5 aims. You can't have an aim that we don't have a methodology for, nor the results for. Everything must be consistent. That is part of what we mean by telling the story. You said at the beginning that there are 5 aims. We followed you down the line. We saw 5 methodologies for the 5 aims, and we went down the discussion. Went down the results. We saw the 5 results for the 5 aims. If you say you're going to do it, you must do it, and you must show us. It's simple. Now, let's come back to the other issue of why you have 5 aims in your paper. That's too much. It's way too much. You should not have 5 aims. If you have 5 aims, that means that either the aims are too tiny and should be collapsed into more broader aims that are comprehensive, so that you end up with maybe 2 aims or at most 3 aims. 1 aim is fine for a brief report, right? 1 aim is fine for a manuscript, but sometimes it makes sense to also look at 2 aims or even 3. It's possible, right? But 5 aims, that's a lot, So it's either that there are only 2 things that can happen here. 1, that your aims are too flimsy and you need to collapse them into broader themes. Again, this is where you can use ChatGPT. Just put the aims in the ChatGPT and say, please, can you collapse them into, more broader groups that, reduces the number of aims in a way that is coherent and makes sense, right? These are the ways you should be using ChatGPT. Or you can just separate them into different papers if they are, by substantive aims already. Those are the only options you have. All right, next question.
Wisdom. Oops. A query.
Okay, unmute. All right. Thank you so much, Prof. You rightly answered my question when you mentioned that to follow your school, your university, the way they want the research work to be reported. I just submitted a proposal to my supervisor in my PhD pursuits, and it was like 88 pages. He said, no. The proposal is too short. Do more literature review, do more literature. You need like 200 pages. I said, 200 pages? Wow. Remember when the last time I mentioned that, when I first used the AI kits, and I asked you how it can be upgraded to like 200 pages. He said, wow, why 200 pages? Well, that's the requirement. Sometimes, okay, like the work I'm doing, I have my concept, I have my idea, but in the process of correcting to align with the, it happened that I've been shifted out of my concept. Well, I need to graduate. I have to follow that same way. If not, I will not graduate. Thank you for this encouragement. And now my question is on this, the way you explain concepts and operation. You brought it very clear, and I've gotten a grip understanding of this. Concept is the idea, and the operation is the work itself. So my question now is, can it be, am I right if I say that conceptual definition will come first, then operational definitions will come at the end of the work, after you've administered your questionnaires, and then you look at it, then you say, this is the operational definition of this, then the conceptual definition is the one before you started the work doing. Thank you very much, Prof.
All right, thanks. So we don't want to separate them as if they are things that are night and day. They go together. You start with the concept in your mind, even before you conduct the survey. When you come to your questionnaire to design a questionnaire, you already have a conceptual framework in your mind, right? Let's say I want to ask about, let's say whether, participants have, an STD, right? I have a particular way I want to capture it. The concept is clear in my mind, but for all manner of reasons, like social reasons and etiquette, I may have to frame the question in a way that is a bit different to get at that, right? And so the operational way I've captured it, because of the need to capture things in a way that is not necessarily rude or offensive or whatever way, may be much a roundabout way of getting to that issue, right? So in that case, the idea that I'm trying to capture and the way I captured it are a bit different. So the idea is that we want to provide, okay, this is what I was thinking of originally, and this is how it was captured, So it's not about the two of them should go together hand in hand. It's not like you present one up here and then present the other one later, right? So even in the methodology section, when we're writing, yes, we want to provide the conceptual first, and then we want to describe how we operationally captured it so that, the reader can understand in a flow what is happening. They understand the theory, but they also understand how we captured it. And if there's a gap between how the theory was and how we operationalized it, that is where we report the limitations. That is, this operational definition may not necessarily align with what we are intending conceptually. And here is why. And this is we're forced to do so because of so and so circumstances. And so this is a limitation. So sometimes the gap between your ideation and your operation may be a reason for putting a limitation in that section, but they should go together every single time.
Thank you very much, Prof.
You're welcome.
And now get another ideation in memory of concepts. Thank you.
Good evening, Prof. I'm seeking assistance in crafting an abstract for a research paper. Could you outline the essential components and suggest relevant resources or applications to facilitate the writing process? I haven't written any research or related research topic yet, but this will be my first trial.
Okay, so you just have to write all the sections we've talked about, and then you now have to summarize them into whatever size. So the introduction of your abstract is no different from introduction of the manuscript itself. Think of it as a very short version of it. The same thing with the methods, results, and discussion, right? Think of it as tiny versions of those sections. So that's what the abstract is. It's a very condensed version of the whole work. So you have to, unfortunately, there's no shortcut about this. If you really want to learn, well, you have to really go and read these slides again and, develop, it's always better to develop the whole idea. It's a lot hard work, much harder work to write something small than to write something big. So even if you want to write something that is 250 words, first of all, write out the whole thing. Don't put for the effort. Write out the whole thing and then find a way of condensing it. If your goal is to just write 250 words from the start, well, you may end up with 0 words. So just write naturally, and then you can then condense it. But you're going to get the slides later on, and then you can use this as a launching pad to see how you can develop the sections.
Okay. How do we deal with the issue of plagiarism in manuscript writing?
You don't do it.
That's it.
Yeah.
These 2 long responses. Okay, so let's do Stephen.
Hey everyone, good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, you are very clearly.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful presentation on the lecture. My question is on data analysis. On your methodology section, you mentioned you've discouraged us from using stepwise, either backward or forward logistic regression in building our final models. So is there any other way that we can do it? Because most of the time, that's the most suitable way, because you take a p-value of less or equal to 0.2 and subject it to multivariable so either stepwise logistic regression to build your final model that's going to be subjected now to the multivariable logistic regression. Because you've mentioned that you are discouraging us from using that. So I was wondering, how am I going to do multivariable logistic regression without a criteria for analyzing the other variables?
So who is
Thank
writing
you.
the paper? Is it you or p-value?
Sorry?
Who is writing this paper? Is it you or p-value?
It's me. I'm the one writing the paper.
Oh, okay, good. So you have some underlying theory for why you're doing things, right?
Yeah.
So why is it then that so we're not saying that there has to be no criteria. Oh, there are criteria, quite all right. One, the criteria is that it should be selection of variables should be based on a solid theoretical basis, right? You understand the subject matter. So you start with a DAG. Are you familiar with DAGs? Directed acyclic graphs.
Yes.
So good. Sit down with a sheet of paper and a pen and draw DAGs and say, all right, here's the exposure, here's the outcome. From my understanding of this subject matter, here are the variables that I can conceptualize that are associated with the exposure and the outcome. So you have to understand the basis of what a confounder is, right? There has to be some knowledge of theory. A confounder is a variable that is independently associated with the exposure and with the outcome and does not lie on the causal pathway. So with your paper and pen, you're going to say, all right, as an expert, here are the variables that I envisage are, as confounders of a relationship, right? You might have very important confounders that are extremely important, but do not meet your statistical framework of p-value less than whatever, right? This is why model building has to be deeply intellectual. You have, as a subject matter, you need to come down with, it comes down to understanding what you're trying to assess and exploring based on the DAG or what other previous studies have identified as key confounders. And that's the better way of doing it, as opposed to, because forward or backward approach simply means that you just throw in a whole bunch of variables into the computer, and whatever comes out, whether it makes sense or not, you are just going to put them in your regression. That doesn't make sense, does it?
It doesn't. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Can considering a different study approach to a previous research be considered as a gap justifying a research, e.g., previous studies being retrospective and this research being cross-sectional or prospective?
Yeah, we've already answered that question. So we're saying that the approach you are suggesting has to be a better approach. You can't be suggesting a worse approach. You can't say, oh, previous studies have done, you know, this is a better approach, but you know what, I'm going to drag science backwards by looking at the worst approach. And let us see, like, no, we want a better approach, right? So that's what we want. So your goal is to address limitations of previous studies, not to drag the entire community backwards. So yes, you can use a gap, but that gap must be improving on previous approaches, not just because you want to do something. So you might have to find another justification if you are just doing something inferior in terms of a study design.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Good evening, Prof.
Hello.
Hello. Good evening, sir.
Hi.
Please, can you hear me? Good evening.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof, for the very insightful lecture. My question is also related to the title. So you talk about the person, place, time, and you know, the school requirements. We had our school requirements for writing our title, which I followed, but time was not included, and it is quite, you know, the lengthy version. So now that I got ethical approval, I'm done with everything. In this stage of manuscript publication, I want to ask, what can I do, you know, to align with this, you know, what you taught us today about it, including the person, place, time? Do I need to go back to write a new title, or to reframe my title and then get another ethical approval for it? I really don't know what to do. Then my second question is, you said that it's to avoid, you know, the very lengthy, you know, write-up we have done for the school research, that we can publish, you know, another aim, maybe another paper, you know. So I want to ask, how do we go about that? Because I was thinking of if it is possible to, from this one very lengthy research that I've done, is it possible to do like 2 papers from it? But I really don't know how to go about that, because am I going to write a new introduction and for another paper, or I just stick to what I have? Thank you, sir.
Okay. So changing the title of the paper is not a protocol deviation. So just because you change the title of the protocol or change the title of the manuscript should never mean that you have to go back to get ethical approval. You go back to get ethical approval if there are substantive changes in the methodology of the study or the conduct of the study, right? You said you were going to sample 200 people, but now, for whatever reason, you need to increase it to 1,000 people. You said you were going to give an incentive of $20, but now you want to give it to $50. You said you were going to, you were just going to ask them, the participants, questions, but now you have to take a blood sample, and so on and so forth, right? If any of those things happen, then you need to go back to ethics, but it's not changing the title. That is completely irrelevant to ethical review. So no, that does not warrant going back to ethical review. So you can change your title. Now, we're not saying that your study, also want to be very clear, we're not saying that your study must have elements of person, place, and time in the title. We're just saying that that is gold standard. That is a better way of doing it. So that in no way means that you must go and make changes to your work. But I was saying that in future work, you might consider making sure that you frame things that way, so that it's just easier for people to read. It makes sense, and it's just, you know, a better way of conveying information. Now, regarding your second question, you have a very long proposal, you know, substantive work. You want to write 2 manuscripts. Well, yes, 2 manuscripts means you're going to have 2 introductions, 2 methods, 2 results, and they cannot be clones of each other. So what you can do is to look at that carefully, the research question. So you will start by going to your methods. Look at the methods very carefully and see where there are substantive areas. Again, these are areas where you can ask ChatGPT. You all have access to AI. This is area you can take the methodology and put it in ChatGPT and say, based on this methodology, I don't know what the methodology is, so I can't comment on it, but this is how you can use resources you have to brainstorm. Use AI as your thought partner to help you with brainstorming things. That's the best way to use it. Say, okay, I have this methodology here. what part of this methodology do you think can be separated into two distinct manuscripts that are non-overlapping or very distinct? And it's going to throw some ideas to you, and you can interact and then review back what it said and say, okay, this makes sense. I see that I can focus manuscript 1 on XYZ and manuscript 2 on ABC. And so that means that introduction methods results discussion for paper 1 will have to be focused on ABC. And for paper 2, we'll have to focus on XYZ. So you're going to have two different things entirely, if that's the route you want to go. I hope that's clear.
Yes, that's very clear. But sir, does permit me? Okay, I've done the research, I've collected my data, and everything is set. So now, well, one of the challenge I had is the word count. So I've done my logistic regression and everything, but my school emphasized that okay, you must meet up with this word count, and they just want. I think most of the ones that I submitted as my results were the bivariate analysis. So now the aspect of my Spearman correlation, where I can just compare, give this correlation between knowledge, perception, and readiness. I couldn't do that. I couldn't submit that result. So I was thinking that that's a very good one, because we want to know whether I want to try as much as possible to advocate a policy where trainings on AI is becoming, I'm sorry, that healthcare professionals are well trained on AI. And that's where the Spearman correlation was very important. So now that I was not able to do that in my submission for the school, I'm trying to ask that, can I still use that same data and methodology to, although the results I'll be talking about my logistic regression, the other type of analysis I did, is it possible? That's what I'm trying to ask, sir.
No, you may not. The problem is, from your definition, it appears that your research question is a very narrow topic, relatively narrow topic, with different methodologies. You've done the bivariate analysis and the multivariable analysis. Your question, in essence, is, can I publish the unadjusted analysis as a separate paper, and then the adjusted analysis as a separate paper? No, you may not, because that would be just duplication. Yeah, it's the exact same research question. Remember that was said that the methodology should have the 1, 2, 3 approach in one paper. The univariate, the bivariate, the multivariable in one paper. Now, it must not have multivariate. It's not as if all three must be there, but if all three are going to exist, they must exist in one paper. So you can't say, oh, I'm going to publish the univariate in one paper, publish a bivariate in another paper, and publish a multivariable. So I have 3 papers all saying the exact same thing. That would, no, that is not acceptable. So all three, the bivariate and the multivariable, must publish one paper. Now, if you publish the first one already in the multivariable, you can't go back and say, I'm just going to do the bivariate. Well, remember we said that the methodology, you cannot take us backwards, because the bivariate is just the bivariate alone is a weaker analysis than the adjusted analysis. So when you say that there are differences in methodology, the new methodology must be an improvement over the previous one. It's not saying that, I have a worse methodology or I have a weaker methodology, and so there's a gap. No, there's no gap there, because we've already gone advanced. So in that case, you cannot do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. So I think you've answered my question rightly. I'll just do everything at once. Thank you so much, sir.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Please, is the session for limitation compulsory? Apart from the introduction, which other part of the manuscript is subject to plagiarism?
Everything is subject to plagiarism. And yes, the limitations is required for most journals. The limitations acknowledges that you're an expert and you understand that your work is not perfect, and that these are the limitations that you've identified. And hence, it's not just about listing the limitations, it's all about saying that, please, when you read the results, read them in the context of this limitation. You're providing us a framework against which to interpret the results. So yes, it's required. Because we can't, without that, we don't know how to interpret the results.
Thank you. Ishmael?
Thank you, Prof. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yes, we hear clearly. Okay, thank you. I have to really appreciate you for your great efforts. The session is really awesome. We are really thankful and grateful to you. My first question is on the abstracts. Some papers, you find out that they're using the word, the paper finds, the paper does this, while others are using the study. So I want to know if there is any rule with regards to the use of the study or the paper, or it is just a choice. That is about that. Then secondly, with regards to the IMRAD method, there are some key sections that are not incorporated in the IMRAD method, especially for those of us that are trained in social sciences. Like literature review, we are taught that it is very, very important that you cannot really carry out a research and reveal your results without giving a somewhat comprehensive literature review. And going by the IMRAD method, there is no any section for literature review. That is why sometimes you find out that the introduction section of some authors, they are making it a bit long because they are constrained by the IMRAD method from the journal they want to submit their paper to. And then there is no room for literature review. So they try to integrate their literature review in the introductory section. Then theoretical framework also. In social sciences, we are really, really emphasizing theoretical framework, that our research must be guided by a particular theory, and we need to reveal it, we need to discuss it in the context of the topic we are talking about. So the IMRAD method is also not having that. I don't know how you can guide us about that, how to incorporate all of this. Thank you.
So the first rule is that the first rule is that I'm not sure why this ugly echo. Can you please mute yourself? Can you please mute yourself, please?
Okay.
I think that I'm echoing from. Okay, great. So rule number one is that there are no rules. Like we really want to stay away from very arbitrary and sometimes very silly rules on anything, right? Every rule is just made by somebody, and most times it's just completely arbitrary without basis. That includes rules about what we call anything. We don't want to get bogged down in semantics for the sake of semantics. So whether somebody calls it paper or study or whatever they call it, it does not really matter. What matters is how was it done? Is there a careful consideration to threats to internal validity? How was it addressed, right? Those are the substantive issues we need to worry ourselves about, not issues of potato. Whatever you call it or however you call it, really is a trivial issue, right? So that's the answer to your first question. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it study, a report, whatever you wish to call it, really is up to you. So there's no rule on that. There should be no rule on that. And it's up to you. Now, if your institution wants to call it one way, sure, knock yourself out. It's that's a very trivial issue. The same thing about the IMRAD. It's just a structure. It's not a rule that was imposed by God saying it's just a way to provide a framework for people to understand how to write. Now, does that mean that you cannot add additional sections? Sure, you can add sections you want. You can say, this is the format I want to follow. And your journal may also follow that format. But you also have to understand that journals also have their own requirements. If you're submitting to my journal, well, we require that papers called original manuscripts or original reports must have the sections. Introduction, methods, results, But most journals also have section for special reports where you can structure it however you want. You can call it whatever sections, right? So that's that about the sections. Now, about literature review, you do a literature review to inform you of the gap in knowledge. It is not everything that when you're cooking a dish, there are many things you prepare in the background. It's not everything you prepare that ends up in the meal, right? A lot of things are just in the background to help you build up to that process. Literature review is one of them. Of course, you have to do a literature review before you do your work, but it's not every single thing that you found in your literature review that has to appear in the manuscript. It's just to guide you to identify the gap. Because the whole point of literature review is to make an inference. We identify gaps in knowledge by means of exclusion. We say, this study found that X found this and Y found that, or X has said this and Y has said this, but no one has said this part yet. So a gap is always identified through inference. Nobody's going to explicitly write and say, hey, here's a gap. We identify gaps through, we infer that a gap exists by reading that, by reviewing the literature and then making that inference that, wow, okay, there's a gap here based on our review of the literature. Now, is that saying that the entire literature that we reviewed should now end up in the paper? No, that's not what we're saying. So when you now make your whole literature, your whole manuscript so long, then that defeats the purpose. I think also that people confuse a manuscript with a thesis. With a thesis or a dissertation, we require you to put the literature review in there so that you are a student. After all, we want to see that you have done work and we want to see all the things you've done. A thesis or a dissertation is not the same thing as a scientific manuscript. Just to be very, very clear. Those are very, very different things in terms of the amount of detail we require, in terms of how we expect them to be structured. So no, we don't want to transpose standards that were set for dissertations or thesis and impose them on scientific manuscripts, because those things are not the same thing. With a manuscript, you are communicating with experts. Like, why does anybody writing something on tobacco have to review the entire body of literature on tobacco control? You're writing to experts who wrote that literature themselves. You don't need to remind them of what they wrote. They know what they wrote. They know what's in the literature already. All right. So when you're writing a manuscript, don't bother telling us, we know because we wrote that literature you're trying to refer to, right? Just tell us your contribution and move on. And we have other things to read. So I think that's where the confusion comes in, where people, especially, if they've just recently written a dissertation or a thesis, somehow just imagine that they're just going to take that and submit to a journal. No, that's not what it's supposed to happen. All right, next question.
Thank you. How can you navigate between paragraph 2 of the discussion and the don'ts of focusing solely on significant findings? Could you please shed more light on this?
So so when I said don't focus on negative findings or null findings, if you are doing a study that says, let's say you're looking at the relationship between smoking and lung cancer, and your study did not find it a significant association, don't dwell too much on that, the absence of any significant finding. Don't go and say, okay, we're going to recommend smoking to everybody, because after all, our study did not find any relationship between smoking and lung cancer. It means that smoking is safe. The point is that no, the fact that you did not find anything in your study could just be because of a type 2 error. So be aware that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Now, please, another thing, just again, in the name of saying there are no rules, what we have provided is just a framework. It's not to say go and take it and say, okay, now. No, it's just to guide you. So you can write your sentences or your paragraphs any way you want, right? So that is up to you. You can develop your own style. You can even make up your own rules on how to write. That is completely up to you. What we've just provided is a framework to help you in thinking of developing a scientific piece. All right, next question.
Ibrahim Rashid.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you very much. In fact, I really appreciate this topic that you burst on us. Yeah, I'd like to know much about when you talk about the type 2 error. Can you let us much about this error you're talking about in statistics? And then how do we identify them? How do we make use of them? And the likes. I think we have to take type errors we can make in when we are thinking about the research, and I just want to know how to use them, how to make a correction of them. You know, there are errors. We are meant to make that error. So what do you suggest? Either being a qualitative or quantitative research method, how do we go about it? Thank you very much. That's my question, please.
Okay, you're supposed to avoid the error. You're not supposed to make the error, just to be very clear. So an error is a bad thing, right? So there are 2 statistical errors in hypothesis testing: type 1 error and type 2 error. Are you familiar with the story of the boy who cried wolf? Are you familiar with that story?
Yes, of course. Yes, I do.
What was the story?
Yeah, the story is about when someone is trying to make a things happen. Along the line, he made a mistake. So through that mistake, he's learning from that mistake. Is it what you are referring to?
Maybe we have a different story in mind. Who knows that story that can tell us what that story is? The story of a boy who cried wolf. Oh, nobody has read that story. What you guys reading in your primary school?
I can't differentiate from old hands to new hands. If you know the story, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, you can just unmute yourself and tell us that story, because that will answer Ibrahim's question about what type 1 and type 2 error is all about.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, so the story is there was a boy in a particular village. Every day the boy will come running to the village saying there is wolf, there is wolf, there is wolf. And the community will come out to find out that there is no wolf. And the next day the boy will do the same. Until there was this particular day, there was an actual wolf that came and actually attacked the boy. The boy was starting wolf, and the community thought that it was the same old story that the boy was saying. That there is a wolf, and actually there is no wolf. But in this particular case, there was the wolf that attacked the boy.
Thank you. Now, what was so the community members made 2 mistakes. They made 2 errors. What was the first error they made, and what was the second error they made?
Yes, so the first error that the community members made is the fact that on the day that the wolf attacked the boy, there was an actual wolf
let's start with
dismissed.
Let's start sequentially, chronologically.
Okay.
What was the first mistake they made?
First mistake they make is the first mistake they made is the fact that the boy was crying wolf when there was no wolf.
That was a boy, but what did they do? What was their own mistake?
I thought there was a wolf when there was not.
Yeah, so they came when they should not have come. They responded when they should not have responded. That's the first mistake, right? Do we agree?
Well, is that a mistake?
Well,
yes, we agree.
Yeah, you can call it a mistake. You can call it whatever you want. Let's not dwell on semantics.
Okay.
Okay. And then what was the second mistake they made?
They did not come
when they were supposed to come.
Exactly. And that's what type 1 and type 2 error is.
Okay.
Type 1 error is we respond when we should not have responded. Type 2 error is when we should have responded, we fail to respond. Does that make sense? So in your data, for example, you're like, wow, you are shouting wolf. Oh, we have cured cancer. You're shouting fantastic things, right? But those things never happened. You just saw them. You're imagining things from data. They're not there. You're just shouting wolf for nothing. So when the media comes and everybody's coming, wow, everybody's amazed at these amazing things you found, but you didn't actually find anything. All you're just reporting is just noise from the data. That's the type 1 error. Type 1 error is when you are looking for a p-value so badly and you eventually find it and you say, oh, my results are statistically significant. Come and look at me, I'm amazing. I have published my paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. And, everybody's happy for you and they're celebrating, but there really was no wolf. You just found a p-value and found one until you found one. And so that's the type 1 error. You cried wolf when there was none. Now, the second scenario is when there's an actual wolf, but you just did not find it. And this occurs when your study is underpowered. There's no power in your study. And so you end up saying, oh, there's nothing interesting happening here. You say the results are not significant, but actually the results are significant. There was a wolf there. You just did not find it, right? So type 2 error is when we have a false negative result, right? and type 1 error will have a false positive result. I hope that makes sense to you, Ibrahim.
Yeah, yes. In fact, that you make the justification to that with that story that you just analyzed now.
All right, great.
Thank you very much.
Where would you put aspects of ethics, consent, RB, or ethical approvals? You seem to have not talked about these, Prof. Thanks very much.
Anything that occurs in the field stays in the field. If they occur in the methods, they stay in the methods. So methods is everything that happens in the field in the session of data collection. So you can put it there. Most journals, however, do not include that in the standard methods. Some journals will have that as metadata. Metadata is data after the data. So at the end of a manuscript, we provide that information. So it depends on the different journal. If the journal has sections for that, then you would provide that in that respective section. So, for example, a journal like tobacco control. Let me show you an example of what I'm saying. Tobacco control journal. So let's look at recently published current issue. Let's look for a paper that's open-ended, open access. I always prefer open the PDF. It's just easier to read the PDF. So like I was saying earlier, most journals increasingly have a section here, which is not part of the paper, but it's metadata. So funding, for example, competing interest, patient consent, ethics approval, provenance, data availability, a whole bunch of other things are not part of the paper. And this is an increasing trend, but are metadata, which is data after the data. So like I said, there's no rule to this. If your institution requires that you put it in the main text, well, put it in the main text. But we don't want to just make up unnecessary rules for the sake of rules. Whatever, as far as it's presented in the information and somebody can, the point is that somebody should access it if they need the information. Wherever you put that depends on what the journal says or what your institution says. So I hope that is clear.
Thanks, Prof. Ian?
Yes, hello, Prof.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you very much for such insightful teachings. So I have two questions. One, in the manuscript, in the introductory section in the third paragraph, when we are using those interrogative pronouns to bring out the gap, should we use each and every of the pronouns that were listed, or maybe we just use them to tease out the gap and just the pronouns that apply? That's my first question. The second question is, in a thesis, and then when we're doing the literature review, can we use some of the articles that we've used in our literature review? Can we also use them in our discussion? Thank you.
So the goal is not to the goal is not to use all the pronouns. That's just too much. The paper should not be too much. So you can use just one, at most two. That makes sense. And then you develop a manuscript. And yes, you can use papers from your literature review in your discussion.
Thank you, Prof. Is it advisable? Oh, okay. You responded to Rostella's question. Okay. Is it acceptable to replicate a study using the same title?
To replicate the study with the same title? I'm not understanding the question. You're saying maybe somebody else has done work with this title and you want to do the exact same thing? I mean, there's no rule preventing you from doing that, but that sounds rather awkward. Like, why would you want to do? Maybe there's a grand reason I'm not understanding, but why would you want to use the exact same title as somebody else? But yeah, nothing is stopping you. You can do that. It's nothing. There's obviously no restriction against that, but it feels a bit awkward.
Thanks for the fantastic session. P-value should not be written in the results section. then in which part of the manuscript should it appear?
No, we never said p-value should not be written in the result. We said you should not have a paper that reports only p-values. There's a distinction between that. So if you have, let me show you what I'm saying. Well, it's going to be very hard to see this kind of poor reporting in a top journal like this. So let me look for, well, I can't even search for a journal now because that would suggest I'm saying it's a poor journal. All right. Now I'm at a loss as to what to do. All right. Let's see. All right, let's just look at a good piece of reporting instead of looking at the bad one. I would have loved to show you a bad one, but now I am caught between the devil and the blue sea. All right, let's look at path. Oh no, let's not use a Markov modeling. Let me just look at, I'm just trying to look at the regular qualitative. Is this a special issue or what? I think looking for the other paper we had. Okay, that's good. Let's just focus on this paper that's already open. All right. Okay, this is not a good paper for the purpose of what we're trying to do because it's just purely descriptive paper. There are no p-values at all. Let's look at another paper from here that has, let's say, PCD current issue. All right, let's look at the paper that is likely. PCD, quite funny. All right. They are giving me bad examples. Let me see. All right, you know what? Let me look for JAMA Open. That should give us some good papers to show what I'm trying to show. I could easily go to a bad example, but instead let's stick to a good example. Show you what I'm trying to. So so here they don't report p-values per se, they report confidence interval, which is awesome. But what we're saying is that when you're reporting an estimate, you would just provide the p-value in association with it too. It's never okay to provide just the p-value. You know what? Let me just take a screenshot of a text without showing the source. And I'm going to go off camera and just pull up something that is really bad to just illustrate a point, but without showing where it is from. Give me a second. Well, I guess sometimes it's also good to learn from the bad. So let's pull up a really bad piece of reporting that illustrates what I'm trying to say. Okay. All right, awesome. Let me take a screenshot so I just focus on the results without focusing on the individuals. All right, now let me share my screen once again. All right, can you see, I don't know, can you see my screen clearly? This is rather small, but anyway, we'll do have to do. So here, this is what we're looking at. This is what we're saying. Here, the report says packed cell volume was significantly lower in the control group post-operatively. P-value is 0.01. This is just wrong. So sometimes you see manuscripts that are like, well, what I will call a p-value study. You see p-value upon p-value upon p-value, but the question is, what are you comparing, right? You see consistently p-values are everywhere, but they are not reporting the results. So what we're saying you should do is this. When you report results, when you say there were significant differences between group A versus group B, what we want to see is you say group A, X% versus group B, Y%, p-value equals XYZ. Aha, this is what we're saying. Don't just report a p-value. That is completely meaningless and completely useless, right? It's like telling us this is almost the same thing as saying there are two matches playing a match, and you say on the billboard or on the scoreboard it says the score is 20 versus 30. This is versus 30 points. This is very useless statistic. It's like, okay, I have many questions. Who is winning? Is it team A or team B? I do not know. Like, just telling me this score without telling me some other metadata is extremely useless because it creates more confusion. So what we're saying is that when you provide a p-value only, this is exactly what you're doing. You are giving us a score line of 20 versus 30 without telling us any other thing. So we're now left wondering, okay, who is winning? Who is losing? Like, which team is 20? Like, so when you provide a p-value, you must provide the groups that you're comparing and the values that you're comparing. The p-value is about comparisons. So providing the p-value only without the values that go with it is completely useless. It's a very horrible way of reporting science. So you either provide the odds ratio is equals to this, and then a p-value is this, but providing a p-value just by itself, completely useless. Should never be done. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Prof. Many thanks, Prof. Agaku, for the insightful lectures. I always learn new and valuable skills from them. I'm grateful to God for the opportunity to connect with your lecture series. Many blessings. Just reading.
Okay. There's typically a question hidden under those compliments, but I'm surprised there's none.
No, that's not.
Okay.
Chinedu.
Okay, good evening, Prof.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay, I'm so excited. So every day I keep improving myself based on your lectures and all that. I'm so excited. May the Lord strengthen you more and more.
Oh, thank you.
What I want to ask is, if you are doing your thesis for your PhD work, for your literature, can you use systematic review? Can you use systematic review for your literature review in terms of the framework?
So a review of a literature is like name implies, we're just reviewing the literature. Whether we're doing it systematically or not systematically is depending on what we're doing, right? A systematic review suggests that maybe you want your PhD dissertation, maybe the first manuscript involves meta-analysis or a systematic review. Of course, you can do anything. You can do anything you want in this life, right? It just depends on what the question is. So as far as you have clarity on what the question is, then you can do anything. So I think part of academic maturity is having the confidence, growing that confidence to say, all right, this is what we want to do, not asking, can we do this? Of course, you can do anything you want, So the question will be, why would we want to do it? is this appropriate in this context, right? So, but yeah, you can do anything you want. It's just making sure the question is appropriate and that fits the context. So in your case, if your goal is to have maybe one of your papers to be a systematic review, of course you can do that. But just to be clear that a literature review and a systematic review are not the same thing. We've covered systematic reviews. A literature review simply means we are reviewing the literature. That's all it means. Nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't tell us anything about the rigor of the review or any other thing. A systematic review is a very well-defined, procedure or methodology, as we discussed in the past sessions we had.
Okay, then what was the difference between sorry for maybe I missed some of the lecture, I came in late, between a conceptual review and a theoretical review of framework?
Okay, so we're going to share this video after this class. So I would recommend that you just go over it, and because we've covered that extensively, so that will be the most beneficial.
Okay.
All right, next question, please.
Then,
okay.
For research methodology, if you are conducting a quantitative research, is there any particular, like some practical for how to develop a framework for your study when it comes to research methodology? How can you give us some insights on how you can go about developing a framework for your study if you are working on a quantitative or qualitative research?
Well, the framework is what we call your aims and objectives. So you have to come up with these aims and objectives, because that's what guides your study. So let's not look for some fancy framework. It's simply called your aims and objectives. So develop the aim and make sure they answer a question that matters. So that's all you need to do.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. I'm grateful.
Okay, I believe we've answered all the questions. All right, go ahead.
Does it mean that all objectives must have different methodologies in the same paper or thesis? Chinedu, please lower your hand. Unless you want to ask another question.
So if the objectives, if you say objective 1 to measure the prevalence, objective 2, you should measure the cost. Objective C or 3 is to measure, let's say, incidence. Well, these are 3 different things. If I now read the methodology, I'm not seeing anything about how you're going to measure cost. Well, we have a problem. If I'm reading, I'm not seeing anywhere how we're going to measure prevalence. There's a problem, right? So yes, if you provide objectives or aims, there should be. You don't have to say. You don't have to be dramatic and say, here is how we're going to. No. But you should provide that information in a way that is cohesive and coherent.
Thank you. When using pronouns to bring.
Sorry, go ahead.
You can finish.
No, please go ahead. You put an end to that, so we must move ahead.
When using pronouns to bring out the gap in the introduction section, should we follow each and every pronoun listed or just the ones that apply to bringing out the gap?
I think we've answered that question before. Just focus on the ones that apply.
Okay. I'm just scrolling. All right, I just see attendance. Okay. How do I choose a better journal for publication?
Well, that's a very loaded question. I don't know the kind of paper you are asking. I don't know without knowing the contents of the paper. That's going to be hard. But here's what you could do. You could go to Jane. Let me show you how you could do that on your own. And this should be helpful. So you go to Jane. Journal selector. So Jane is the journal author name estimator. You type in your content here. So let's say that this is the topic we're interested in. Let's just copy some of this text we had. So let's say this is the topic we're interested in looking at. This is the title here. We'll copy that. I'll put it in Jane. And we can find journals. So that's one way you can look for it. And then depending on the content of the paper, you can look higher, you can look low, but that will be dictated by the content of the paper. All right, next question.
How can we identify predatory journals?
There's an index, there's an organization that tracks predatory journals, but they grow faster than they can ever be tracked. So the best way to apply them is to use common sense. If a journal is reaching out to you and telling you that if you submit your work today, they're going to publish it tomorrow, well, that should suggest that that doesn't sound right. So they are just some hallmarks of predatory journals. They are assuring you, that guaranteeing you your work will be published. Anybody that guarantees you their work will be published, well, that doesn't make sense. It's likely predatory. If they have an unreasonably short period of publication, 1 week, 1 day, whatever, if it's unreasonably short, then in essence, if there is certainty involved, then it's likely predatory. If there's any part of that offer that is 100% certain, something is not right. No editor-in-chief will tell you that your work is certain to be published. No editor-in-chief will tell you that it's certain that your work will be published on this date. Now, whether they are asking for money or not doesn't make them predatory, because even legitimate journals sometimes ask for money to publish a paper, whatever they call it, whether I call it processing charge or whatever, that in of itself is not qualifying. But the most important metric to use is your common sense.
Thank you. Could you kindly shed some light on Chisquares University? I read about it in one of your LinkedIn posts. When is the launch and what is the academic calendar like? Could you also share more details?
Okay, so Chisquares University is, we're applying for accreditation to offer degrees, master's degree in certain things like masters of public health or masters of science in specific disciplines, like maybe software engineering or some things. So so that's the whole idea. The whole idea is the same way we have classes, we can just put structure to them. We're also going to build a whole brand new platform for learning, for engagement, so that you have independent learning. So it's something that's currently underway, putting a lot of thoughts into that. And so you will enroll. We have a screening process. Obviously, we don't want to recruit. We're not looking for a huge crowd of people. We're looking for people who are very driven and who we just want to develop a model and prove that education can actually be changed, where it's not just about getting a degree, but you can provide education in ways that are life-changing, right? So that's the whole idea behind what we're trying to achieve. And so there's a whole process. There's a whole process of accreditation. There's a whole process of building a platform for learning in a way that it's not just about passing information, but in a very engaging way, using gamification, right? Different models of product architecture that really, really conveys or passes information in a really, really terrific way. So these are some things that are going. And so when we're done with that, we would let you know. But that's the process. That's the process underway.
How can you help me with my postdoc? Can I learn under you?
Well, you're learning under me already by coming to the sessions.
Blessing.
Prof, thank you so much for the lecture. Please, I have just one question.
Okay.
I heard when you said Google is not a database for systematic review. And I want to know if there is a particular database that would be good for educational or social science systematic review? Or does it mean that PubMed is also, you can also get those literatures from PubMed when you're working on an educational project or social sciences? Thank you.
Yeah, you can use PubMed, you can use Web of Science. The slides we shared last week or a few weeks ago had half a dozen databases you could use. So please, you can refer back to them.
All right. Thank you, Prof.
Welcome.
Prof, when will the new course Epitech commence?
So what's the question?
When will the new course Tech Epi?
Oh, when will it commence? Well, it takes a lot. Well, it's not just a course. We're trying to create a whole new discipline in research or in academia. You don't just create a discipline overnight. It's a lot of work. You have to form a society. Then you have to set up competencies to create and to measure it. Then you have to create a form of communication for the society in form of a journal, right? And then standards and all of those things. How will the society be financially independent? How will it do? Those are things that don't just happen overnight. But this is, we'll keep you updated as it comes. But it's something that takes a minute. So once but we'll provide updates as it happens. But I think that is something that we definitely need. I think I'm very convinced that it's a discipline that needs to exist because there are just too many gaps in between the practice of epidemiology and the tech. We use the tech for our science, but it's like who validates the tech to make sure it's correct. If you take for lay people will always just say, oh, this software has this and this software has this, so they're the same. But that's a very simplistic way of looking at things. It's not just about whether this one has this and whether this one also has this, right? When you now look under the hood, you realize that, oh my gosh, some of this software, should never be used for research because they can capture data on very simplistic things. But when it comes to research, the assumptions or the flaws that come from a design perspective or software engineering directly impact how the quality of data and sometimes even introduce bias into the data. That is something I think should really be a new field needs to be created to address that, because the thing is that people do their best. They only do what they know. So if a software engineer who very bright knows how to write code excellently and says, oh, I want to create a software that does XYZ in research. Sure, they are doing their very best and they don't know what they don't know. So if any errors arise from that process, it's not malicious. It's just that, well, they know how to code and they did their best, right? So we need people who know how to write the code, but who also know the science to come and say, all right, this is how we build software that is designed for research, and making sure that that software truly doesn't have some of the inherent biases that are, very, very, widespread. A common example is, data cleaning. When we say we have all accepted in the scientific community that data cleaning is normal, but there's nothing normal about data cleaning. Data cleaning arises because it's a failure of the software to validate data so that it's collected in the right way. So that's just a common example, right? If we're designing software, when you contrast this, for example, Chisquares, we've built Chisquares intentionally for research. And so it's all about thinking at every step, what are the biases? Like, how can this particular thing be, because it's not normal. There's nothing normal about cleaning data. It just arises because the software we have used to collect data has gross absence of basic validation to ensure that data are collected in the right way. And so we have to clean it. But it's quite a paradox that we just have all collectively accepted it as normal. And so that's why I feel that has to be filled, because, people who know the science and who know how to write code, those are the people who can create the best software ever, because they know that, they understand the needs of the research and they can bring that into being. They can write the code that creates that solution into life. So that's why I feel that there's a great need for a field like that. But we'll let you update you as we go by.
Thank you. Charles.
I think that's an old hand.
It's a new one, unless it was mistakenly raised, but it's a new one. Okay. Chinedu, you have so many questions. Can you speak so it can be quicker? You can unmute yourself. Okay. Alrighty. I think that's it. I mean, Chinedu, some of his questions you have already responded to. What is the best way to do referencing? That's a new one.
Whatever way is required. I mean, some of his questions require absolute answers, but it's all based on context. It depends on what the journal is asking for. So that's an impossible question to answer.
Okay. All right. If I missed any other questions, please forgive me. But I think that's it for today.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm going to run away before somebody else comes up with another question. All right, thanks everyone. Have a pleasant weekend.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
You're welcome. All right, ciao everyone.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Good
For
night.
the
Thank you,
insightful
Prof.
lectures all
Have
the
a
time.
wonderful weekend.
Thank you,
Good
Prof.
night, Prof.
God bless you.